Kitano Sujito could no longer see anything with his naked eyes. All he could see was the accumulation of complex colors. However, between the real thing and the illusion, there was a vague network that extended in the vast space. Kitano Sutoto captured the most intuitive outline. It was like a towering tree with branches on top and roots on the bottom. Half of it was visible, and the other half penetrated into the endless void. It also directly interfered with the structure of time and space. The sun wheel, that ruled over the changes in brightness and darkness in the sky, was also inextricably linked to the outline of the veins. Great divine treasure of the Fusang divine tree. Any ability user in Ban City could guess this answer based on their instincts. But what was special about Hoshino Sujito was that his spirit and perception could follow the veins of the roots in the void and explore into a level that was unimaginable in the past, allowing him to see the most intuitive details. Am I also talented in the structure of time and space? As the absurd thought popped up in his head, Hoshino Sujito also saw the brilliant sun wheel held up by the branches of the giant tree, like a tomahawk in the hands of a giant god. After the first attack failed, it slightly retracted and then smashed down again. Crack. The pure explosion on the spiritual level crushed Hoshino Sutoto's mind. His mind was tightly bound to the extraordinary image of the sun wheel and the giant tree. When it collided with the pass in the clouds, he felt most of the details inside and also had to bear the surging impact from every detail. With a muffled groan, Hoshino Sutoto's brain felt like it was forcibly split open and filled with hot magma. The pain was far greater than the damage from having his soul power sucked away. Even with his strong physique, he couldn't resist it. He staggered back a few steps until he hit the door frame at the entrance of the observation deck. His legs were so weak that he couldn't support his body, and he slowly fell to the ground. The self-protection mechanism was finally activated. The sun wheel and the giant tree all turned into meaningless smoke. Even the corresponding memories were blurred. He just followed the inertia in front of him. He opened his eyes wide and watched the distortion around the pass in the clouds, pushed to the extreme, and the abnormal contraction of the sun wheel, also pressed to the extreme. When things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. In just 1,000th of a second, an unprecedented strong light burst out. Hoshino Sutoto closed his eyes, but the strong light still penetrated his eyelids and reflected a translucent blood-red color. 2 seconds later, the strong light faded and Hoshino Sutoto dared to open his eyes. Even after the most dazzling wave of light had passed, half of the sky was still as bright as day. The dark night had been torn to pieces and there was almost no trace of it. He saw that under the bombardment of the sun wheel, most of the structure of the pass built next to the clouds had evaporated. There was a large hole in the center with a radius of at least 1 kilometer. In this void environment, the thick clouds that were like towering mountains had become irregular piles that connected the front and the back. Even the other areas that didn't bear the impact of the sun wheel were already riddled with holes. It seemed that if there was another strong wind, it would vanish into thin air. The intercontinental airship moved forward under the bright light. There was almost no cumulonimbus around it. It was like a normal flight. This is really, Hoshino Sutoto was confused. Everything that had just happened was beyond his cognitive limit. The self-protection mechanism was still working. All he knew was that the situation had suddenly been pushed to the most intense level. In the blink of an eye, there were only ruins left. At this time, he saw Bai Xinyan, who was still standing in front of him. The most intense scene had passed. Everyone was finally able to focus on something that they had neglected before. This mysterious woman stood perfectly straight from the waist down, but her upper body was leaning forward. She stretched out her arms against the tempered glass wall. Her body trembled as she breathed. It was clear that the other side wasn't having a good time either. Hoshino Sutoto opened his mouth, wanting to ask a few questions, but the smell of fresh blood rushed up his throat. His mouth and nose were already wet. The relatively weak capillary network had nearly burst clean. He choked and coughed. Blood sprayed everywhere. He was in a sorry state. Bai Xinyan must have heard the cough. She exerted some strength in her arms and turned around to look. Her expression was calm, but her face was pale to the point of being transparent. Hoshino Sutoto coughed out the blood clot in his throat with great difficulty. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Is he dead?" He was obviously referring to Ronan. Bai Xinyan curled her lips. "I'm not sure. He isn't." The Pope's telepathic thoughts had been absent for a long time. They reappeared and reverberated within the tree nest. But his words confirmed that the structure of the mental plane had already lost its stability. The telepathic transmission was illusory and illusory. There seemed to be a dark flame burning in the corner, creating disturbances from time to time. The Pope, however, had no intention of mending the situation. He described in detail what was happening at the moment in a rare instance. We have broken the framework that he had erected, and broken the rules that he had forcefully inserted, but there is still a certain distance between us and his existence. Distance? Maybe it's only a centimeter. Maybe it's 1,000 kilometers. Maybe it's in another space and time. You mean, there is no point in delving into this? Look, the fortification is being restored. In fact, we are shuttling through its huge and precise construction site. Every water molecule we have come into contact with could be the building material for the next construction. Even though Hoshino Tsutodo's spirit was extremely dispirited, he still subconsciously turned his gaze to look through the viewing platform. He looked at the gradually darkening sky and the scattered clouds. In fact, he couldn't see anything special about it. It was probably because of his first impression. He felt that the flying cotton-like objects around the airship were suffused with a faint spiritual light. There were faintly discernible trajectories that interweaved to form the outline of a grand building. At this time, Bai Xinyan asked, "What do we do next?" "We don't do anything. That attack just now practically mobilized all the power that can be mobilized at this distance. Since we weren't able to make the final decision, we won't be able to do anything to him for a while." Bai Xinyan and Hoshino Tsutodo didn't know how to respond. If the Pope's words were to spread, Luo Nan's evaluation in the inner world would probably soar by several levels. Oh, it seemed like there was no one who could rise by several levels? After a few seconds, Bai Xinyan said, "Your Majesty exerted force just to reach this conclusion?" It sounded like sarcasm at first, but in reality, it was very formal. The Pope's response was very calm. "I just feel that there is no need to hold an educational competition. Young people are so pure. They are researching this battle on the spot. They have probably forgotten their original goal. Do they want to be high profile? Or do they want to be low-key? What's important is that Chinju has been led into a rhythm by him. She has forgotten today's goal. Fortunately, I still remember. Your Majesty's goal is to find that interferer of Ban City? You suspect that it is Luo Nan?" Bai Xinyan's telepathic thoughts suddenly became straightforward. The Pope took advantage of the situation to continue. "Look, the situation has become clear. Today we have at least verified that he has this ability. Don't say doubt. That will only make people more confused." Confused? His ability exceeds expectations, but his critical performance deviates. He can't see through the inside. Of course he will be confused. Oh, so he encountered a confusing choice when doing a multiple-choice question? The Pope's telepathic thoughts seemed to be laughing. "Child, reality has never been a question. Only a young man with a straight and narrow eye would need to be matched one by one to be flawless. Right now, I just need to know that he is a fellow that needs to be taken seriously." The telepathic thoughts continued, but the structure of the tree nest could no longer support itself. It suddenly collapsed and turned into nothingness. Professor Luo could definitely do it. Subconsciously, Kitano Sukido put a hand on his chest, hoping to stabilize his abnormal heartbeat. At the same time, a faint light appeared before his eyes. It was Bai Xinyan opening the virtual workspace. What was shown in the work area was work. "If such a thing has just happened and yet you're forcing me to sign it without any consolation. How cold-blooded and foolish. It turns out that I'm surrounded by a nest of giant lizards with only their cruel nature left." What? Actually, Kitano Sukido wasn't sure if Bai Xinyan was talking to him, but it felt better to chat at this time. While Bai Xinyan was operating in the virtual workspace, she refuted, "It's already like this and you still want to stir up trouble in Osaka? Of course I refuse." Kitano Sukido opened his mouth. He felt like he was watching a stage play. Bai Xinyan's expression and actions were on point, but there was a strong sense of deliberate intent, as if she was purposely putting on a show for someone to see. It was really a satirical play that made people unable to laugh. At this time, Bai Xinyan had finished her work. She turned around and kindly continued to comfort him. "Mr. Kitano, it's almost over. Look at the two of us. One is a bodyguard and the other is a kept woman. We both have masters to serve and from time to time, we have to expand our service scope. Our lives are already so hard, why do we have to think about things outside of our duties? What F*** King Sugar Daddy?" Finally, Kitano Sukido remembered that this was an analogy that Bai Xinyan had used when she was talking to Yukawa Aishuk. In fact, it was still an analogy. "Yes, we just have to be loyal to our duties." Kitano Sukido bowed to Bai Xinyan, and his gaze landed on the first-class cabin behind the observation deck. Right now the first-class cabin was a mess. A group of bodyguards had survived the disaster, but their soul power had just evaporated. Each of them looked like they were in a daze. Yukawa Aishuk was still lying in the aisle, and the almost forgotten Shanbei Xiaohui was still there. This was a situation that required a lot of effort to clean up. Then again, compared to other related situations, this might be the easiest to clean up. Kitano Sukido began to busy himself with the aftermath. During this time, communication requests from the outside world continued to come in. These requests came from all sorts of directions, but their focus areas were highly overlapping. Thus, a series of high-frequency words were formed. The Amaterasu Order, the Pope, the True God. These words were definitely inescapable, but they would always add some evasive modifiers. In comparison, another word was much more direct. Luonan, 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 buzz, buzz, buzz. It's weird. Luonan floated under the water of Beishan Lake. A strand of his consciousness was anchored in the clouds 1,000 kilometers away. Doing two things at once was no big deal for him, but there was still some pressure when it came to analyzing and designing the spacetime configuration. He needed to be more focused. At least half of Luonan's mind was still focused on the moment when the sunwheel descended and bombarded the pass in the clouds. He watched as the sunwheel jumped out of nothingness, crushed the obstruction of the spacetime structure, and smashed down on his head. It was just like in a war game, when an exploding fireball was about to hit the player, and then the game was over. Strictly speaking, the game had already been reread once. Luonan's game character, the spacetime bubble he controlled, had already collapsed. It was like this for a moment. The key to the impact of the falling sunwheel was not the impact. The fatal killing move originated from the instantaneous explosive distortion of the surrounding void environment. The spacetime structure was illusory yet thick, empty yet tenacious. But it could still deform in the end, especially when the power of an extraordinary detonated the turbulent tsunami of the abyssal region. Then it interfered with the material plane and focused on the instantaneous explosion. The powerful distortion had already touched upon the plane of laws. It squeezed out all the redundancy in the spacetime structure. Luonan couldn't even muster the thought of resisting. He could determine that if he forcefully digested the instantaneous explosive power, the spacetime bubble would certainly not be able to withstand it. The pressure would inevitably return to his body. The sandwich domain was fine, but the exoskeleton frame was already damaged. It would most likely not be able to withstand the pressure. So Luonan let it happen. The spacetime bubble collapsed, but the net's core, which had been pouring into the void, was still preserved. Luonan quickly reconstructed on this foundation. There was a gap of about 2 seconds between the collapse and the reappearance. It was short, but for the True God and the Pope, 2 seconds was enough to explain the most crucial problem. The spacetime bubble was highly suspicious in its nothingness. I made a mistake. Luonan admitted that he had avoided direct damage in that instantaneous collision, but he had also lost his strategic target. He had allowed the True God and the Pope to see part of his bottom line, which would inevitably cause him to be passive. But who would have thought that the True God and the Pope, two extraordinaries, would actually join hands to deal with a junior like him? That's right. The attack of the solar wheel descending had the True God providing the output and the Pope controlling it. The two extraordinaries had synchronously controlled the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure system, giving Luonan a head-on blow. This blow had shattered Luonan's disguise. It had also forced him to reveal the level of his ability. It had made him expose, or at least partially expose, his strategic intent. The following problems would certainly be very thorny. But then again, the True God and the Pope had exposed a lot of information in that moment. Especially the Pope's tree nest structure. It used Yukawa Aishuk and the others as fulcrum and fuel. Admittedly, it saved quite a bit of strength, making it possible to strike a thunderous blow from over 1,000 kilometers away. But at the same time he had also given Luonan a chance. This allowed the altar's spiderweb, which had been laid out earlier to probe into the human heart, to seep in. Similarly, Yukawa Aishuk and the others acted as fulcrum as well as a medium and channel. The subjective perspectives and operations of the True God and the Pope during the pursuit and the solar wheel descending attack were transmitted back one after another. This was an exquisite operation built upon the level and train of thought of extraordinaries. It was built upon the foundation of the propping mulberry tree's great divine treasure system. Even if Luonan had been in the game, he would not have been able to experience this level of detail by relying solely on Yukawa Aishuk and Kitano Suzuto. However, Luonan had borrowed the altar's spiderweb to integrate various perspectives. He had cleverly increased the precision and sensitivity of these detectors. He had discarded the blurred, distorted, and exaggerated impressions, forming a stream of information that was like a high-definition video. He could even play it frame by frame and study it over and over again. There was no more beautiful replay than this. Also, Luonan felt that he needed to re-evaluate the effects of the Daydream Nightmare incident. It was precisely this early investment that allowed the breadth and depth of the altar's spiderweb to grow explosively. If it weren't for the need of today's actual combat, Luonan would not have known that 99% of the passengers on the intercontinental airship had already been pulled into their homes by the spiderweb. It was just a matter of how deep the spiderweb was. Just how many of them would be needed in the entire world to analyze the situation on the airship. As the spiderweb was spread out, the Wraith sign clearly became more and more accustomed to this world. In the past, the human-faced arachnid was fine when it was in the abyss region of the polar domain. But once it sunk into the material plane and probed into the sea of consciousness, it was absolutely impossible to hide from extraordinaries. Some keen psychic ability users were able to sense it. But now the altar's spiderweb was universally connected. It had practically become a part of the hearts of the entire world. Its concealment ability had become inconceivable. Who didn't have a dark corner where the web had gathered dust? It was just a bit noisy. Chapter 858. By Sinyan, you scheming B*TC. You've gone too far. The long-awaited instructions came back, and Captain Jimmy's mentality completely collapsed. He roared as he kicked the chair in front of him, and his arm almost hit the nose of the SEA's Minister Dayan. His entire body had turned into a terrifying storm. It was the team's deputy Monroe who was sweating profusely as he tried his best to calm him down. Boss, calm down. Calm down. Captain Jimmy continued to roar back, calm down $T. $T process. Every step in here is a piece of garbage pasted with $T. Then what about you, the initiator? That sentence could not be said no matter what. Monroe could only stretch out his arms and make a pressing motion, using all his expression and body language to persuade his boss, who was on the verge of losing his mind. This is a critical time, Jimmy. Think about the airship over 1,000 kilometers away. Think about that state. That state of being raised by AB*TC. That Blackheart Salt is doing this on purpose. This is a shady deal between her and the Blood Flame Order. She's seizing every opportunity possible. Being stared at by Captain Jimmy's charcoal-like eyes, Monroe's mind was momentarily taken away. Aside from being overwhelmed by his aura, he also felt the grade suppression of the 7th-generation dynamo core. His mouth opened and closed twice, but he couldn't finish his sentence in time. Great, if she wants to disgust us with the process, I'll accompany her to the end. It's just another round of $T. I'll report the new discovery to the East Asia Department. Are you deaf? Memory loss? You didn't even record the large piece of intelligence analysis just now. If you want me to collect your salary on your behalf, I'll break your spine as a thank you gift. Captain Jimmy's roar could practically tear open the roof of the warehouse. The poor intelligence officer was suddenly targeted. He didn't even dare to raise his head as he began to work with a sullen face. The intelligence officer's memory was actually far better than that of an ordinary person, and his writing skills were also pretty good. He quickly converted Captain Jimmy's forcefully twisted logical analysis into a rigorous and meticulous document form. Seeing the content of his imagination quickly materialize into words, Captain Jimmy finally grinned. He already couldn't wait to sign and send it over. He didn't expect this kind of one-sided statement to be able to move the bureaucrats of the East Asia Department, as long as it could have the effect of disgusting by Sinyan. Captain Jimmy's expression suddenly changed. BZZT BZZT BZZT. The sudden vibration signal affected all the members of the operation team in the warehouse. There was almost no delay. At this moment, the dynamo core determined that the main body was in peaceful mode, and immediately displayed the received information on their retinas. Captain Jimmy choked again. He wanted to vent his anger, but in the face of such a high-priority order, he had to temporarily suppress his emotions. Remote conference? Menda pondered over the core words of the notice, but he was also confused. The fewer words, the bigger the matter. A simple meeting notice was sent to every team member, bypassing the frontline commanders. Even when he wasn't at war, he was still extraordinary. Most importantly, it had come at the right time. Boss, the meeting will start in 10 minutes. Do you think? Men turned his gaze to the SEA's Minister O'Hara. Captain Jimmy's black and red face still had traces of distortion, but he didn't make a sound and only turned his head to the side. Mend let out a sigh of relief and immediately fulfilled his duties as an assistant. He put on a smile and politely asked Minister O'Hara and the other SCA officials and staff to leave. If they wanted to wait outside, they could wait outside. If they didn't want to, no one would care even if they went home. This layer of buffer was awkward but effective. When Mend turned his head, Captain Jimmy had already sat down with his eyebrows furrowed. The intelligence personnel who were chased away felt like they had been pardoned. They focused on adjusting the remote channel and preparing for the meeting. Video conference? Reality conference? Tactical conference? After a quick exchange, the emotions of the operation team members in the warehouse were much more relaxed. They weren't unfamiliar with this kind of situation. As the new generation of burners equipped with the 7th generation dynamo core and operating the latest Deep Blue platform, they were originally expensive experimental subjects. They were deployed all over the world to carry out various missions in order to continuously send back experimental data to support subsequent research. On a more realistic level, they also needed to form a brand new tactical system based on the new platform. It had already become a habit to have a tactical conference every 2 or 3 days to exchange experiences. Things like tonight, which consumed a large amount of resources to achieve the effect of long-distance reality communication on a global scale, only proved the importance of this conference. Captain Jimmy needed to carry out this conference as a tactical command. Everyone in the warehouse became busy. Have the surveillance personnel been withdrawn? In position in 4 minutes. Warning system? Activated. Inspecting mental link. Link node clear. Group synchronization rate at 97%. Connecting to Mirror Image 1 network. Connected. Two-way synchronization initiated. Environmental interference index normal. Captain Jimmy glanced at it and saw that the interference rate was floating around 2%. This rate was very low and had no practical value. However, it was already a relatively ideal state for long-distance communication. If it was a requirement for actual combat, it would be at least 10%, which was probably the standard of the previous version of formatted space. Their operation team's record was 47%. As for the laboratory environment, the highest record was a heaven-defying 70%, which was said to be able to kill even extraordinaries. Frankly speaking, up until now, Captain Jimmy wasn't particularly proficient in this kind of combat style. The laboratory, on the other hand, was thinking of all kinds of ways and opportunities to deepen the impression of this batch of experimental subjects. Reality information loading. Countdown to login. 3, 2, 1. The archetype format symbol that represented the transfer to virtual reality appeared and instantly enlarged. When the tetrahedron, inscribed and circumscribed spheres expanded to the limit of vision, the emptiness of the central region opened up. The astral winds and clouds in the sky wrapped in the boundless dark curtain of night and rushed towards them. This might be a real scene or it might be a completely virtual product. Captain Jimmy habitually moved his limbs, but the low interference rate and emptiness made this movement meaningless. He gave up on the warm-up and turned to look around. His operation team had finished assembling and was now in this airspace. In other directions, figures appeared one after another. Most of them were familiar faces. They were all burners who carried the Apocalypse experimental 7th generation dynamo core. Director Yen is over there. Captain Jimmy quickly saw that their true leader, Yen Yonghua, who was known as the pioneer among burners, was not far to the side. He was a gloomy and paranoid guy. More importantly, his authority over the dynamo core was one level higher than most of the people here. Whether it was public or private, Captain Jimmy had to go and greet him. Hold on. Men stopped him for a moment, indicating for Captain Jimmy to observe Yen Yonghua's expression. I'm afraid he's not in a good mood. Oh. Virtual reality allowed everyone's external appearance and expression to obtain a high degree of restoration. It could be seen that Yen Yonghua's bad mood was already visible on his face. His face was ashen, clearly indicating that others should stay away. Captain Jimmy was also in a state of violent rage a few minutes ago, but when he saw Yen Yonghua's expression, he suddenly felt that it was better to calm down a bit. Discussing their superiors was everyone's common hobby. Jimmy and Mend were no exception. I remember that he was in a good mood a few days ago. He was waiting to watch a good show. It's an auction. He's waiting for Professor Luo to make a fool of himself. Tiske. The two of them understood. It was at this time that a clear graphic presentation appeared in the night of virtual reality. It went straight to the point, informing everyone of the topic of this conference. Nature of the conference, tactical seminar. Objective of the conference, Conduct an analysis and research on atypical extraordinaries and formulate a targeted tactical plan. Case reference: Intercontinental Airship Attack and Defense Battle Keywords. Luo Nan, True God, Pope of 100 Collections Configuration. The night sky slightly rippled, and in the next second, an airship appeared in the clouds below. The airship indicator light attracted the gazes of most of the participants. Buzzing sounds of discussion arose. Since this was a tactical seminar, the public channels were all open. The participants who entered virtual reality could use voice, text, images, and even telepathically to communicate with each other. Everyone's information network was quite well informed. They were all very sensitive to the focus of the event. While they really are up to date. The real scene is transcoded. It's not a simulation. Is this first-hand information? Where did it come from? Look at this perspective. It's a mosaic of satellite images. How many satellites did they call over? Then what do you think of this close-up view? The emotions and curiosity of the participants were quickly squeezed out by the fast-paced, high-intensity conference. In reality, the vast majority of meaningless exchanges were suppressed to the point where they disappeared without a trace by the time the demonstration advanced to the stage of the chase between the True God and Luo Nan. And when the grand scene of the sun wheel descending and the cloud pass shattering arrived, everyone was already dizzy from the dazzling scene and the enormous flow of information. Captain Jimmy was one of those who were dizzy. The entire process was played once in less than half an hour. The edited version was played at least 20 times, and the key joints were emphasized over and over 200 times. He was still dizzy even when he returned to the real world. His left eye was the sun, his right eye was lightning, and his brain was full of the cloud pass that was being assembled, burst apart, and then pieced back together. What the hell are they talking about? Yeah, most of it was just guessing. Men's effect of listening to the lecture wasn't much better than Captain Jimmy's. Of course there were explanations in the real scene demonstration. But there were configurations on the left, configurations on the right, and some spacetime structure in the middle. The storm of the gully region, coupled with the chaotic and complex structural analysis of the cloud pass, was completely directed in the direction of evaporating one's brain juice. Captain Jimmy was baffled. If one had to consider all these messy things during battle, how would one fight? Perhaps it was because of this that he was holed up in the operations team as a squad leader. But come to think of it, those who had a higher status and authority than him might not be any better off today. The information vibrated over. He glanced at it and felt a little dizzy again. F***CK. Those people from East Asia Institute. This is good. Men was baffled. What's wrong? They're using us to return a favor. The tactical example just now, the one that just came out, seems to have returned the favor and taken it from the Amaterasu cult. For this, we have to return the favor and temporarily help the Amaterasu cult. We're helping the Amaterasu cult in Band City? Can we afford to? That's what it means, high-level thugs? Captain Jimmy didn't mind at all. Rather than working for someone else, he was more interested in getting out of this boring old warehouse and actually doing something useful. Whether it was dealing with the vagrants or higher-level enemies. Mend, on the other hand, was thinking about something more practical. Who should we contact with the Amaterasu cult? This? East Asia Institute is a little too much. Captain Jimmy was stunned. He looked at the contents of the mission again. There was no explanation in this regard at all. This was more troublesome. He tried to find the East Asia Institute to clarify things. Just then he received an instant message. Captain Jimmy's expression changed immediately when he saw the message. Men glanced at it and saw the words. By Xinyan. He snorted in his heart and instinctively thought of the worst. He looked at Captain Jimmy again. At this moment his expression was even worse than Yen Yonggua's. In the sky above Band City Airport, indicator lights and radio signals intertwined. After 4 to 5 hours of tossing and turning, the huge intercontinental airship returned to the airport. Sigh. On the airship that was about to land by Xinyan's side. Her slender fingers caressed her forehead, pretending to be weak. I told you that your soul power has evaporated and your mind is damaged. You need to rest. Why didn't you listen to me? Kitano Suzuto glanced at her. He had enough of her exaggerated acting skills. The one who didn't need to act to show that he was extremely worried was his boss. Yukawa Aishuk gripped the outer edge of the space capsule tightly. His entire body was tense and rooted to the spot. It was as if he was facing a life-and-death situation. In fact, in Yukawa Aishuk's eyes, the airship that was about to land at Band City Airport and himself on the airship were bait that was about to be thrown into the devil's mouth. In the future he would only be eroded by acid. It's all Luonan's fault. It's all Luonan's fault. Luonan. Chapter 859. Sister Yuan, it's true. I just went for a spin. The subsequent developments were completely unexpected. It's nothing. It's really nothing. My limbs are all gone. I didn't even spit out a mouthful of blood. The situation has been too chaotic recently. I need you to take care of the family, Sister Cat Eyes. Hee, you worship me? Then don't make fun of me in the group. I used a portion of the principles of the lamination interference technique in the battle, but it can't be considered a mature application. I will summarize the specifics of the situation, and then we will discuss it. Although Luonan had done many world-shaking things during the time he had been away from home, it was only during the previous half an hour that he had taken out his own name. It was during this half an hour that he needed to spend several dozen times the time to deal with the subsequent effects that followed. The Xia City branch was certainly in an uproar. Actually, the inner world was already in a storm not long after the incident. The information channels originating from the Amaterasu Order and Quantum Corporation had already spread the connection between Luonan and this matter. But at the time the situation was unclear. The battle situation was tense. No one dared to contact him for fear of disturbing Luonan's attention, giving the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of. The group of people were scared witless. They did not dare to casually send messages until the end of the battle. Luonan still had a conscience, or perhaps it could be said that he had a guilty conscience. He took the initiative to leave the silent state of communication and find He Yuan to explain the course of events. This caused a second explosion in his circle of friends. Luonan spent a bit of time communicating and explaining to his family and friends in Xia City. This was not difficult. Let's not talk about the reason. Everyone understood his current situation. They respected his choice and strength. They would not drag him into asking questions. The true trouble was outside of his network of connections. Luonan. Whether it was during the silent state of communication or during the communication with his friends, Luonan's ears and heart never had a moment of rest. Yes, his method of misleading true gods and the Pope with his game character had failed. But this spectacular failure was like the strike of the falling sun chakram. It smashed into the hearts of millions of people in the world. And the vast majority of these millions of people had a thin spider thread extracted from their mental plane. The threads interweaved and scattered, building a complex and deep spider web. Now, what he sensed was the echoes of the emotions transmitted by the thousands of people through the spider web. As for the exact number of tens of thousands of people, currently there are already 90,000 stable cage bubbles on the altar's spiderweb? 100,000? A stable cage represents an awakened who have cultivated successfully. How many people are there in the entire inner world? According to Luonan's impression of the latest statistics, the number of registered ability users in the entire world was only around 76,000. This was the result of explosive growth in the last half year. Of course, this number did not include the nomads of the wilderness, the military's burners, and the ever-increasing number of human mutants. But even if these people were included, the number of people bound to Luonan's altar spiderweb covered over 90% of the world's awakened. As for the ability users that were even further away, similar to Worker Zhai before he awakened, their numbers were 10 times greater than the previous group. Without a doubt, this was another full coverage. As for the bubbles of ordinary people that were born and extinguished with the passage of time, their scale was enormous, and their changes were rapid. They had already lost the meaning of statistics. Rather than calculating numbers, it was better to evaluate the breadth of the space they covered. It was more or less the same as the soul cloak. There definitely weren't this many in the past. Luonan had done a similar inventory before. It definitely wasn't on this scale. He had already guessed why. The Daybreak Nightmare is very powerful. The Abyss World's might is boundless. But right now this isn't the main point. Luonan's current name was only known by a few people in the government, the military, and the upper echelons of the business world. But from the perspective of the inner world, Luonan's name could already be said to shake the world. There was no one who didn't know him. Especially this sort of freshly minted extraordinary information. It involved extraordinaries, and it also stirred the secular world into action. It formed a news event with global influence. Anyone who was close to this circle could not avoid talking about it a few times. In this way, hundreds and thousands of people revolved around Luonan every minute and every second. Their thoughts unfolded, and they even conversed with this name. A storm of information and a maelstrom with no end gradually converged within the constantly changing space and time. If it were someone else, this storm would only exist within the transmission and storage of various media, relying on a material carrier to exist. But for Luonan it was a different situation. The altar's spiderweb stood in the void, appearing and disappearing in the hearts of people. The noise that echoed in the mind was like the vibrating hum of mosquitoes and flies. Not only did it make clear the core meaning, it also informed every noise-making node without restraint of the location, medium of transmission, flow trajectory, and even emotional color. This was the resonance between the human communication network and the altar's spiderweb. It was the deep level of information in the material and mental domains. It was the comprehensive feedback of Luonan's deep and rich layers of senses. At this very moment, Luonan's eyes and the bottom of his heart reflected such a complicated background and complex world. It was precisely because of the complexity that the noise surged with large amounts of repetitive and redundant information. It formed a surging flood that washed over him without end. This is a bit annoying. Though he said this, Luonan's state of mind was still quite calm. It was unknown when it started, but dealing with this information storm that could collapse and burn brain cells had already become a part of Luonan's daily life. The grand structure of the living starry sky, the global coverage of the soul cloak, the trillions of fragments of the misty maze, the sun wheel and absolute purgatory formed together into the abyss world. Again and again each wave was more powerful than the last. In the end, Luonan was equipped with an immunity. This made him no longer drift with the tide. Instead, he followed his own logic to buffer, precipitate, divide, and even analyze and integrate the enormous amount of information. In fact, the information storm that surrounded Luonan was much more regular than the attacks he had suffered before. The regularity represented familiarity and order. Luonan subconsciously muttered, "Oh me." At this time he was the incarnation of a small wooden stick that reached into the cotton candy machine. From the grand structure of heaven, earth, and the hearts of people, he accumulated sugar threads to form a marvelous cloud-like creation. It would be quite good if he could create cotton candy with ordinary craftsmanship. But if he used himself as a yardstick, transformed his knowledge into rules, measured the hearts of people, and followed the law to create things. Luonan closed his eyes, and his thoughts naturally poured into the altar's spiderweb. Within the complex layers of the network, on the back of the wraith sign that climbed up and down, within the flood of information and life force that weaved back and forth, there seemed to be an incorporeal 3D printer operating, causing a certain silhouette to gradually appear. That appearance was that of Luonan. Compared to Luonan of the real world, the two were like human figures inside and outside a mirror. They were mirror images of each other. Only some of the details weren't perfect enough. They needed to be corrected. Chapter 860. Everyone has a heart that strives for perfection. They want to fix imperfections. Luonan's thoughts shuttled back and forth on the mirror image, comparing it with each other. It was more or less the action of looking into a mirror. And the more he examined and corrected it, the more detailed the mirror image revealed. This was not strange. This was because this was the accumulation of images, emotions, and calculations in the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people. Thanks to the blessing of modern imaging technology, very few people would mistake him. At the very least, they had a basic understanding of his appearance. This guaranteed the basic recognition of the mirror image. But under the appearance of convergence, everyone had their own understanding of Luonan in their hearts. Just as the saying goes, different people have different opinions. The vast majority of people had fixed impressions based on the guidance of various media, but they more or less had their own opinions. There were overpraise, prejudice, vilification. And they were using modern convenient channels of information to rapidly communicate with each other, influencing and overlaying each other. In this way, the corresponding accumulation of images became more and more cumbersome, redundant, complex, and contradictory. Most importantly, it was distorted. This gave Luonan the fulcrum to pry open people's hearts. But it was precisely this distortion that passed through the spiderweb of the altar and converged onto the mirror image. The surface was calm, but the inside was conflicting and colliding with each other. It could collapse and fall apart at any time. The reason why it did not collapse was because the mirror image existed in advance. It was the basic core that Luonan had already established. It was built on the foundation of formatting theory. It went through the polishing of the 9 orifices 6 roots martial arts philosophy. It went through the deepening of coupling theory, and it went through the immersion of the condensation ring and other configuration concepts. Luo Nan relied on this to construct the glorious and resplendent living starry sky, touching upon every corner of the complex and real world. Of course, the system brought by the Wraith sign had always surrounded and influenced him. And all of this, if traced back to the source, could be attributed to the abyssal world Sun Wheel and absolute hell. It was a vast and dangerous balance. Luo Nan had deduced this when he researched the lamination interference technique. Now he naturally used it. It was this clear dissection that anchored a relatively stable fulcrum for Luo Nan between heaven, earth, and the hearts of people. The changes of the wind and clouds in the surroundings had a fixed foundation. It could be deduced and born from basic rules. Of course, these rules were still fuzzy, but they were already divided into near and far, virtual and real and illusory. Even in the complex overlapping space and time, in the distorted and chaotic bewilderment of the hearts, they could still firmly exist. And on this foundation, they dealt with the distorted image transmitted by the altar's spiderweb and deduced more essential things. Overall, this core might not be and the core might not be perfect, but its source was clear and the direction was correct. At this moment, it could be seen that the torrent of thoughts formed by hundreds of thousands of people was not entirely a burden. It was good to have those distortions, contradictions, and conflicts. Though some of the images of Luo Nan in people's hearts weren't realistic enough, they were proven to be achievable through deduction. They harvested some fantastic ideas. Some of them appeared to be very reasonable, but after deduction, they discovered that their current strength was insufficient. There were also some that were completely off the mark in their deductions. Their roots were wrong and they didn't belong to him at all. So in Luo Nan's eyes, the mirror image on the altar's spiderweb grew more and more real. The distorted and chaotic elements were gradually expelled from the mirror image. They were like clouds of mist, spiraling and undulating. Oh, was it a misconception? Luo Nan suddenly sensed something. The veil of invisibility that his main body carried seemed to have become a bit thicker. That's right. Luo Nan even captured the source of the change. The mist that had been expelled formed a mirror image as well. It crossed the barrier between real and illusory, entering the domain of the real world. It reacted with the veil of invisibility, fusing with the veil of invisibility. It was an order that had existed long ago. Luo Nan's thoughts followed the distorted elements and transformed mist. They naturally entered the depths of the veil of invisibility, touching upon the veil of mist and the order that had existed long ago. It was like an ornament that hung behind a gauze curtain. It was faintly discernible, but it was arranged in disorder and categorized. Every individual ornament was a convoluted creation of its own rules. There seemed to be some sort of orderly connection between them. Without a doubt, these were all things that had been analyzed, used, and stored by the stacking interference technique. When combined with the essence of this technique, it was like a mask. As long as one put it on, one would instantly become another person. Of course, the vast majority of these masks could not be used. After all, Luo Nan had yet to create a true corresponding spirit core. He had only drafted a private version of the configuration design. This was the difference between the public version and the private version. There were many intelligent and automated steps that required him to do it personally. He had to research and ponder over them one by one to find the corresponding activation program. Only then could he use them. But in any case, he had walked the right path. Not only did the previous accumulations exist within the veil of invisibility, new elements were constantly precipitating. They grew in number and clarity. They originated from Luo Nan himself. They came from his core. All sorts of abilities, skills, and rules were analyzed within the core. They were transformed into materials and components, arranged in order. All sorts of designs were needed to be pieced together in order to finally form a complete and logical mask template. For example, based on the condensation ring, he had already derived skills such as the water drop sword and soul cloak. Going even more complicated, the cloud pass he had just created involved basic materials from other domains and was pieced together under the rules of the configuration system. But from the looks of it, this was just a semi-finished product. He needed to review and research many times before he could finally take shape. And even if he did take shape, this kind of template would be relatively monotonous. Was he supposed to go out and fight enemies? Was he supposed to hide inside like a tortoise? He needed to bring out a set of combo punches. Of course, this series of materials that belonged to Luo Nan had already been integrated into his current default template framework. Overall, it was already quite mature. And this default template seemed to be able to perform more perfectly than Luo Nan's body and soul framework. After all, this was the product of theorization. Speaking of which, The stacking interference technique was very much like an analytical tool when used. It could perform an in-depth analysis of the various elements contained within itself, or it could perform combinatorial experiments. It was simply like a laboratory cum dressing room. It was an extremely efficient operating environment. But no matter how efficient it was, Luonan still needed to expend quite a bit of effort to reassemble a new template, especially one that could completely conceal his identity. Luonan found a new toy and his mind naturally fiddled with it. During this process, the mirror image on the altar's spiderweb and his true self in the real world intersected and fused on a deeper level. The space-time bubble around his body correspondingly transformed into a faintly discernible mist. It was lively and fleeting. It seemed to be supported by an incorporeal flow of air, and sunlight and moonlight rotated and poured into it. It transformed into boundless colors and shapes. And as he fiddled with it, the original decorations and the new products that had gradually accumulated flowed through his mind like a horse lantern, allowing him to inspect his memories. This one had just been precipitated. It was useful. It was too simple. This one looked very reliable, but he couldn't find the right door to enter. And this one. Luonan's mind suddenly came into contact with something that was half old and half new. Chapter 861. Snake Tongue suddenly woke up from her meditative state. The living room of the yacht was empty. Inlu was nowhere to be seen. The virtual work area was still lit up, and the interface was constantly refreshing with information. Ability users from all over the world were revolving around the hot topic of last night. Wave after wave of discussions were launched, and the keywords were none other than Luonan, the airship, the Amaterasu order, and so on. For the spectators, the matter was over, and it was time for them to show their strength. But for the people involved, was it really over? Snake Tongue looked at the time. It was approximately 4 in the morning. It had only been 5 or 6 hours since the intercontinental airship incident. The atmosphere in Ban City was still very low, making her heart feel heavy. Snake Tongue adjusted her aura and followed the feeling in her heart. She slowly stood up. There was no one around, but she still took traditional steps out of the living room and took the small elevator to the upper deck. There were few lights on the passenger terminal, but the darkest hour had passed. The railings on the deck chairs and other decorations all revealed their silhouettes in the dusk. At the same time, there was a figure at the bow of the ship, who knew how long it had been standing there. Secretary Een. Madam North Mountain. Even though they had adjusted it many times, the way they addressed each other was not precise enough. They were unfamiliar and polite, just like their relationship. Don't you want to rest for a while? There are some matters in the headquarters that need to be dealt with. Thank you for your hard work. D-City was 3 hours earlier than Ban City, so it was about time to deal with things. Needless to say, some things did not care about time. Just like this moment. Snake Tongue only casually greeted him. Her gaze and mind were cast outside the yacht. The bow of the anchored yacht was pointing towards the east. The lake was vast and one could see everything at a glance. One could even see the glaze that had been quietly painted on where the water met the sky. At this time the ground was still being colored layer by layer. A few clouds were piled there randomly. Stirred by the changing colors, they vaguely turned into indigo mountains, adding a sense of composition to the design. Snake Tongue furrowed her brows slightly. She looked at the sky and clouds in the distance, which were gradually brightening. The feeling in her heart seemed to have been illuminated a little, but it still wasn't vivid enough. Een followed her line of sight and gently exhaled. Is it sunrise? I thought there would be no sun today, thick clouds and low atmospheric pressure. It doesn't feel good enough. The conversation that had been going on and on was suddenly stuck here. In fact, both sides of the conversation had captured a common understanding from each other's perception. But as the faint light of dawn enveloped them, their bodies inexplicably felt a bit hot and dry. It stirred their energies, making them feel quite uncomfortable. This change was much more direct and sharp than the change in the clouds at the edge of the sky. Snake Tongue lowered her eyelids and tightened her mind. She whispered, "Don't expose yourself to the outside." Indeed. Een gave one last glance at the light of the clouds at the edge of the sky. She turned around and walked back, but she hadn't taken 2 steps when she sensed something at the same time as Snake Tongue. In the blink of an eye, the two saw a small flying machine suddenly soar into the sky from the warehouse at the dock. It didn't obey the traffic rules of the peaceful trade market. It flew straight into the clouds and soon disappeared from their line of sight. Een and Snake Tongue glanced at each other, They both furrowed their brows. In this kind of situation, as long as one was an ability user, they would have to make some sort of reaction. However, most of them would be like Yin Lu and Snake Tongue. They would be muddle-headed and make guesses. Captain Jimmy's reaction was too obvious. This wasn't strange. After all, they were backed by Quantum Corporation and even the government and military. On the other hand, over at the inner world, the two hurriedly returned to the living room on the lower deck. It was quite strange. As they entered the shadowy area of the cabin, the discomfort brought about by the disturbance of energy naturally calmed down. The effects were immediate. They just didn't know if this was a temporary phenomenon. The projection work area was still flickering at this time. The interface where Luonan and the Amaterasu orders spammed before finally had some other elements mixed in. Band City, Fantasy Clouds? This topic had just appeared for a few seconds when another freshly baked topic flipped to the top. Band City Sunrise. Please help me decipher it. Vitality is restless? I nearly went berserk just now. The coordinates are the Shiqin district of Band City. The Divine Tree's Kingdom of Heaven descends. Since the topics discussed in the forum were closely related to Band City, the words that followed easily swept away a large amount of attention from the world. Yinlu opened a few posts and similar topics became very influential. She used the waterfall mode of intelligent categorization to automatically select keywords. She scrolled for over half an hour, but the more she scrolled, the more she scrolled. However, the majority of the posts were pictures, descriptions, conjectures, and the like. Aside from pointing the spearhead at the Amaterasu order, there wasn't anything useful. Yinli's brows furrowed. She wanted to go to a more professional circle to take a look. Just as she left the post page, she saw a new post that was highlighted, pinned to the top, and other effects. It forcefully appeared in the very center of the work area. The bright red words were extremely glaring. Most importantly, the poster was from the Band City branch of the Ability Users Society. Yinli's wristband buzzed and vibrated at this moment. She lowered her head to glance at it, and her brows furrowed even tighter. This is troublesome. The forum post opened as she spoke. The information on the wristband was split into two screens and projected onto the work area. The reason why Yinlu did this was because the things described on both sides were exactly the same. Even the words and sentences used were exactly the same. The gist of it was that Band City's side discovered that an extremely dangerous mutant had infiltrated. The Amaterasu order was righteous and had taken the initiative to open a so-called divine nation to protect the safety of the citizens. The Band City branch demanded that all ability users in Band City immediately register online and report their location as well as the brief situation of the nearby ability users. They were to cooperate with the Band City government and the SCA in conducting a comparison of social authority in order to ensure safety and so on. Big Sua's entire city? Is the Band City branch sticking their faces under the feet of a true god? Are they willing to act like cows and horses to play with? The above words weren't said by Yinlu or Snake Tongue. It was the ridicule of some spectator on the forum. However, this person's words hit the nail on the head. As an Ability User Society branch organization without an extraordinary overseeing it, the Band City branch had already been reduced to a vassal of the Amaterasu order over a decade ago. Normally it was invisible. Now that it had jumped out, it was nothing more than a marionette on stage. This is, looking for Mr.? Yinlu and Snake Tongue looked at each other once more. They both felt that trouble was imminent. The power of the Amaterasu order, coupled with the semi-official nature of the Band City branch, really did possess something akin to a legal coercion in the inner world. It was more or less the same as fight if you don't accept it. Even if they were cooperating, Yinlu could go register, but she was the only candidate who could register. It was true that Snake Tongue had an ordinary identity in Band City, but in the end, it was just a facade. She had always hidden her true identity and notoriety. Not to mention Luonan, who had made his debut under the name of Mr. Mo. However, there was no such person as Mr. Mo in this world. Even though Yinlu had left some arrangements in D-City over the past 2 days, it was enough to deal with normal situations. The people on the ship gathered together and corroborated each other. The logical clues were chaotic. To sum it up, suspects. However, wasn't this a bit of a roundabout way too big? I thought we were going to charge into geosynchronous orbit and then turn back. Isn't Mars better? Captain Jimmy walked into the main hall with large strides. He had circled back from the Quantum Corporation branch in Band City. The private airship had just finished connecting with his flying craft. However, the sarcasm in his words was not limited to his family's itinerary. Bai Xinyan could be seen from afar standing in front of a projected area that was not yet clear. Her complexion was normal, and she was even smiling and greeting Captain Jimmy. Next to her was Yukawa Isuk. He had an unlucky expression on his face. He was sickly and dispirited. He turned a blind eye to Captain Jimmy's arrival. "You're beating around the bush because you can't find him. Hee, you're still so self-confident." Captain Jimmy was still a bit confused about the new mission he had been assigned. He only knew that he was to assist the Amaterasu Order in finding a powerful individual who had been in hiding for a long time. However, this did not stop him from fiercely attacking Bai Xinyan when the opportunity presented itself. This is the truth. The Amaterasu Order has used methods that are close to flipping the table. From sunrise until now, they still haven't locked onto their target. Bai Xinyan carelessly brought up the Amaterasu Order. It said that this is due to the surrounding area having some convoluted and distorted spacetime dimensions. Excluding natural phenomena, it's the interference of the extraordinary plane. It's a shielding interference. It's also a big problem. The one who concluded was a middle-aged man of unclear age. He did not come here in person, but rather appeared in the projection area. The most direct impression he gave others was that he was bald. His eyebrows and beard were sparse and his skin was pale. He gave others the feeling that he didn't have enough nutrients to support the growth of his hair. He looked very thin and weak. Perhaps this had something to do with the large robe he wore. The 7th generation Dynamo Core had already recorded the data of all the extraordinaries in the world, and it was updated in real time. Captain Jimmy completed the match in the first instance. He immediately straightened his legs and puffed out his chest. "Your Majesty." This bald middle-aged man was the Pope of the 100 Collections. Jimmy was still puzzled. This Majesty had just finished attacking Luo Nan, yet he came back to find trouble. Where was the logic? Captain Jimmy was not an idiot. He looked at the 3 people gathered before him and thought of last night's arduous training. He suddenly grasped the inner connection within. Trouble equals Luo Nan? Was this scene set up for Luo Nan? But wasn't that fellow several thousand kilometers away? Could it be that he had returned? Bai Xinyan suddenly asked, "Your Majesty, do you think that there's someone behind Luo Nan?" "There's no need to rush to conclusions." The Pope of the 100 Collections faintly smiled. His face was sparse with hair and his expression was amiable. "The truth is that there's a strange existence in Ban City right now. He's suspected to be an extraordinary, but he's different from all the other extraordinaries on Earth. Of course, we need to investigate his background. He might not be a living person. If he's not a living person, then what is he? It's hard to estimate. The initial probing won't have any results. After all, I'm not proficient in the mental side." The Pope of the Amaterasu Order, Majesty, was the spiritual leader of millions of believers. He was the world's top mental extraordinaire. For him to say that he wasn't proficient in the mental side was truly the biggest joke in the world. The Pope still smiled amiably. "You can't view the convenience of horse racing as an ability. Besides, there's no future in the mental side. Perhaps you agree?" Captain Jimmy discovered that he couldn't get a word in edgewise. He was the same as Yukawa Isuk next to him. They were completely superfluous. He only heard Bai Xinyan respond. The road ahead was paved by a character like Majesty. "How could I think so much?" "Oh, the registration of the Ban City branch has been updated. Tell me about it." Currently, there are more than 3,400 people registered. Among them, 700 are at least awakened. As she spoke, Bai Xinyan projected another distribution map. With Ban City as the background, the map was dotted with dots of varying density. Next to him, Yukawa Isuk's pupils dilated slightly. He secretly compared the image with the information he had. He felt that this included almost all the secret orders and supernatural organizations in Osaka. Even if it wasn't 100% accurate, it was close to 80% accurate. "Not enough," the Pope said simply. "The time limit isn't up yet. This is a problem of attitude. I will convey Majesty's opinion." Bai Xinyan shrugged. "Next, Majesty, please arrange for your subordinates to communicate with the various orders and organizations in Ban City. The Ban City branch and the SEA will send a message to those who have records but haven't voluntarily registered. If necessary, they will visit and urge them. All work will be completed by 1:30 p.m. By that time, Ban City will have more or less been plowed, and we can begin the next phase of the operation." Captain Jimmy also stared at the distribution map and searched for relevant information. His mind was racing. After a few seconds, he suddenly spoke. Does our team also need to report? Bai Xinyan glanced at him. Her eyes were clear and calm, but in Captain Jimmy's eyes, there was a hidden meaning. He liked this, especially liked to destroy this. So he spoke again. For the past few days, we have been neighbors with a few aptitude users. We also watch them work and discuss business. They probably aren't locals of Ban City. So far, it seems like they haven't registered yet? Chapter 862. Around 10 in the morning in Ban City, after nearly 6 hours of fermenting, the internal forum of the Ability User Association was already overflowing with noise. Once the matter was related to personal interests and dignity, the thoughts of the spectators would become a direct sense of immersion. Then it would transform into corresponding emotions. This was what was known as the will of the people. Of course, this sort of thing erased the warm and tender feelings of the so-called legal principles of social order. When it came to crossing the chasm of strength, it was mostly useless. The most obvious evidence was the progress of the registration. It was still advancing steadily, forming a densely woven net that tightened one's flesh. This sort of method completely relied on superior resources to crush them. There wasn't the slightest bit of ingenuity, yet it left people helpless. Truthfully speaking, there was always a bit of buffer space within the crushing of society's resources alone. What truly gave the ability users in Ban City a sense of oppression and suffocation was the sunlight that sprinkled down to every corner of the city. The sun had already risen to the top of their heads. Its heat and penetrative power continued to rise. It didn't matter if one was outdoors or indoors. It didn't matter if one was exposed to direct sunlight or hidden in the shadows. The all-pervasive light waves could always permeate the surroundings of people. They carried the tyrannical interference imprint of the Amaterasu order. They were like demonic eyes floating in the air, radiating a gaze filled with blazing malice. Yinlu and Snake Tongue were on the bottom deck. For the first time, they felt resentment towards the brilliant lighting design of this area. They had already closed the light baffles of the portholes, isolating them as much as possible from the sunlight. The lights inside were also extinguished to distinguish the direction of the penetrating light. The entire living room was dusky. The only source of light was the virtual work area. Subconsciously, Yinlu and Snake Tongue had already stopped conversing. Their body movements grew less and less. They even stopped looking at the constantly refreshing forum messages. They each occupied a different angle, curled up their bodies and restrained their auras. It was as if they were in a narrow and claustrophobic cage under 24-hour surveillance. They were like clay sculptures or wooden statues. They didn't know whether or not they had already been exposed. In fact, it didn't matter whether they knew or not. Right now, all responses and all pretenses would become weak and laughable in the face of the chasm that was like a heavenly moat. Frequently coming into contact with existences of that level, they had a corresponding introspection and self-awareness. Time passed little by little. Snake Tongue's state of mind went from doubt to disturbance, and then gradually returned to tranquility. His rich life experience, especially in the past half a year, had already polished a persevering and tenacious heart. She temporarily couldn't understand life and death, but as long as she could survive, no matter how difficult the situation was, it didn't seem to be more torturous than the previous 200 days. When one's heart calmed down, one's senses would naturally arise. The feeling did not originate from the stimulation of the sky barrier, but from the spiritual level. It was almost a natural disturbance like air currents and water waves. They had existed since a long time ago, but they were too common, causing people to unconsciously overlook them. Snake Tongue even felt that this wasn't an external stimulus, but rather a subtle and mysterious connection. At this moment, all external activities were immersed in a high-risk environment, and she was under multiple constraints and restrictions. Moreover, it was not a good time to meditate and cultivate, so her attention was naturally drawn by this subtle connection. Furthermore, she also discovered that the other end of the connection, or rather a key node, was right beside her. It was on Yinlu, who had also entered a state of silence. This was the so-called subtle mystery. Once the mind was biased, the connection between the two would naturally be strengthened. On the other side, the eyelids of Yinlu, who had her eyes closed in contemplation, twitched. She opened her eyes to a slit, and her pupils turned slightly to make contact with Snake Tongue's gaze. This allowed her to further confirm that the connection really did exist, and it was extremely sharp. Was this a type of mutual telepathy? It was more or less related to Luonan. When was it established? What was the point of safety in the current situation? The thoughts in Snake Tongue's mind couldn't help but grow, but she soon came to a realization. There was no meaning in thinking about these things because she most likely wouldn't obtain an immediate answer. It was clear that although Yinlu sensed it, she was in a state of astonishment. Just as both sides were probing, contacting, and researching, a telepathic thought suddenly interjected. It was unfamiliar beyond their imaginations, but it had the flavor of familiarity. It was like a drunken stupor and relaxation. A new person has entered the boss's territory. What's the situation right now? The sudden insertion of his will instantly picked up the obscure form and caused the power behind this layer of subtle connection to expand with a hum. The increase in energy level brought about a direct feeling, which was the change in luminosity. It was like a flash of light in a dark room. It flickered and died, but it was enough for people to see the outline of a scene that exceeded their expectations. Of course, this was on the mental plane. Whether it was Yinlu or Snake Tongue, they were both shocked. In comparison, Yinli's mental strength was a notch lower. Her habitually suppressed telepathic thought had a clear increase. It was as if a bomb had been set off in a relatively quiet space. Who is it? A pitiful person who works for some boss. Perhaps the other party felt that this explanation was too confusing, so she added, "To put it nicely, I'm like a secretary or a maid. To put it bluntly, I'm like a leashed cat or dog. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm called Cat Eyes." When the other party frankly introduced herself, the latent power that had burst forth from the stimulation of their telepathic exchange returned to tranquility. It quickly settled down, just like a flash of light that had been polished and then extinguished. It was just that after settling down, the flickering embers naturally possessed a certain law. When Cat Eyes finished introducing herself, the result of the law's guidance had already changed from a quantitative change to a qualitative change. It had accumulated to a meaning of existence that could be sensed by the 3 female ability users of similar statuses. This was a relatively meticulous structure, and it possessed an extremely distinct sense of space. Cat Eyes, Snake Tongue, and Yinlu resided on the mental plane. Their eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and all sorts of other senses, as well as their perception of the external material world, were separated by a layer. Only the mental plane, the law and order that gradually became clear, gradually appeared in a pattern that they could understand. The feeling of the flash of light in the dark room was far too vivid, so much so that the 3 of them still felt that this was a dusky room of unknown size. They maintained a relatively close distance between each other, similar to the type where they stood side by side. Due to the accumulation of changes in their perception, Snake Tongue and Yinlu weren't able to react in time to Cat Eyes' self-introduction. Only after a few seconds did Yinlu speak: Cat Eyes? Siasity's Cat Eyes? After half a year of in-depth understanding, Yinlu naturally knew that Cat Eyes was a member of Luonan's circle of friends. But for them to meet under these circumstances, it seemed that their identities weren't as simple as just friends. If it was a deeper layer, was she a forbidden zone? It had to be said that Cat Eyes' attitude gave the 3 a good start in their interaction. Under her good example, and of course within Luonan's domain, Snake Tongue and Yinlu had no meaning in hiding their identities. Their self-introductions naturally came. There was a certain awkwardness in this period of time. After all, their identities and positions were more or less contradictory in the public social network of the inner world. However, Cat Eyes didn't nitpick. Is there? There isn't? Yinlu was very baffled. Her current mental state was also very baffled. Her mind was naturally divided into 2 parts. One part was communicating with people in the movie theater that was neither real nor fake, unable to see through the bewilderment barrier. The other part was stationed in the Abyss District. It was closely connected to the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District, forming a transparent high-level clairvoyance. The 2 parts of her mind didn't conflict. They were both real and real. Gradually, she could feel the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District. There existed a rather rhythmic warped undulation. This caused her mind to sway, and she was quite pleasantly surprised. It was probably because this feeling was very familiar. She would come back to it from time to time in the past half year. According to Mrs. Halder, this was someone's usual experimental method. The foundation of the Blood Flame Order was essentially nothing more than a set of experimental products for that person. As the deputy first oblatum of the order, it was actually a bit difficult for Yinlu to adapt to this rhythm. But under the current circumstances, this distortion that affected the foundation of her extraordinary strength was like a gently swaying swing. It brought her along to leisurely sway. Everything was out of her control, but it was inexplicably safe and secure. Mister? The thought appeared in the movie theater. Before it could completely take shape, Cat Eyes let out a whoa from the side. There really is one. The background of the image of the blue sky and white clouds suddenly had the color of blood spread out. Moreover, it appeared at the center of the mist fortress that Enlu spoke of. The newly emerged elements possessed a very strong sense of space. It was as if they had entered another world through a hole in the depths of the mist. There were towering rocks and flowing bloody light. Below it was a hot lake of lava, and above it floated turbid clouds and lightning. It was malevolent and terrifying. It was similar to the demonic realm's ghost prison. Within the movie theater, one could even hear the muffled sounds of lava boiling and flowing. Enli's mind finally became confused. She couldn't distinguish the relationship between the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Clear Abyss district and the image of the Blood Soul Temple in front of her. She subconsciously muttered to herself, "The Blood Soul Temple?" Before Cat Eyes and Snake Tongue could react to this, a living creature with wings suddenly emerged from the chaotic cluster of clouds. It was accompanied by a long and hoarse cry as it charged out. Its shape was similar to a prehistoric pterosaur. It had a sharp beak, a thin neck, long wings, and a thick tail. Its entire body was featherless and covered in scales. The most astonishing thing was that these things were actually in groups. When the leader appeared, a dark mass of people followed behind, stacking upon each other. Amidst the clamorous cries, they spat out a large amount of acid. It was like a violent gale and a sudden shower of rain that rolled down. The cloud was wrapped in acid rain. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder roared. Amidst the crackling sounds of exploding lightning, a group of beetles resembling a black cloud appeared. It was unknown how many thousands or tens of thousands of them buzzed out. What followed was an absurd amount of meteors that were thrown down. However, halfway through, one could see that each and every one of them had their limbs bunched up. It was difficult to distinguish their stone humanoid forms as they were thrown down towards the bottomless layer of clouds. And this was just the beginning. In a few breaths of time, there were countless waves of marvelous creatures that appeared from within the cluster of clouds and lightning. Behind them, there were even man-made flying machines and large mechas rushing out. Occasionally, there would be a few illusory human figures whose faces could not be seen clearly. They either spiraled in the air, dropped down at high speeds, or attacked each other. They occupied the entire screen of the image. The three female ability users in the movie theater seemed to be watching an absurd fantasy war film. It also seemed as if they had fallen into some absurd dreamland. A more rational way of looking at it would be like someone had taken multiple shots and spliced them together into a video work. At the same time, it was presented in this large background. Not to mention the effects of the editing, just the logic of the shots was enough to make one feel despair. If one had to find a common point from this mess of images, then it would probably be this. Every image of an existence manifested an extraordinary power. Moreover, every power seemed to be rather out of the ordinary. This was especially true for the few illusory human figures that pierced out from the back. Most of them were only wrapped in a single layer of armor. Some of them even wore unlined clothing and were unarmed. Yet every movement they made pierced through the sky and collapsed the clouds. They roared through the wind and thunder. It was as if they were gods manifesting themselves. It should be said that everyone was an extraordinary. The image of Cat Eyes in the movie theater very naturally assumed a posture of supporting her chin with her legs crossed. Your Blood Soul Temple is actually a summoning class? That's not funny. Not to mention the two conversing, Snake Tongue was watching seriously to the side. She was dizzy from watching, but at the same time she had some strange sensations. She seemed to be able to hear some sort of noise amidst the unbearably chaotic background noise of the fantasy war film. It was extremely muffled and rather chaotic. The additional noise seemed to be the whispers and discussions of these people. In addition, there was also clatter, clatter, clatter. It was unknown when, but the fine sound of trembling chains had emerged from within the turbid mist soulfire. It rang in their ears, and it was also boundlessly far away. If one were to carefully experience it, it would seem as though the chains were probing out from the depths of their souls. One end was locked and the other end was connected. They were connected to a boundless and enormous net of chains. Every person within the movie theater, regardless of whether they were complete or incomplete, was a tiny node in this enormous net. This Cat Eyes clearly recalled the nightmare from a few days ago. This memory was conveniently shared with the other two, and the corresponding emotions were transmitted back. Her willpower was trembling unconsciously. The structure before her eyes was becoming more and more different from the movie theater. It was to the point that a more suitable name was given: an altar. An enormous altar. An innumerable number of believers surrounded the surroundings, attentively watching the chaotic image in the center. Or perhaps it could be called a miracle. They also offered their souls to the miracle. The power of the sacrifice transformed into invisible flames that resonated with the miracle on the altar. It provided energy and also refined the images, allowing the gaps to be mended and naturally transition until they became one. Within the space of the altar, there were millions and millions of souls. The chains connected, sacrificed, and smelted, forming a complete closed loop. This was no longer a movie. The vivid and lifelike images and inconceivable scenes were merely embroidery that floated on the outer layer of true power. As the power trembled, it seemed to exist in the form of a living being. As for what the deeper nature of this power was, just below the trembling embroidery, a ferocious shadow suddenly appeared. Although it was only half a body, one could already see the ugly appearance of a human face, an arachnid body, and 6 different colored pupils. The instant this demonic shadow appeared, the surroundings of the entire altar seemed to be burning with a layer of raging flames. The flames scorched the mind and scattered fear. It was as if all the destructive power within the chaotic image in the center was projected onto the plane of reality. But it was only as if. The malevolent demonic shadow arched its body halfway out when a foot stomped heavily on its back. A complete and familiar silhouette of a human stepped on the arachnid demonic shadow, appearing within the vision of the consciousness of the 3 clear-headed people. Luonan. The embroidery of true power trembled even more violently. It was thanks to them that the body of power, which was originally invisible and unfathomable, had vaguely transformed into an enormous cloak. It encircled Luonan's body, conforming to the marvelous rhythm of Luonan's existence as it trembled and tumbled. They could only see that Luonan was the core of the cloak, but they could not see where it extended to. Luonan created all of this. He dominated all of this. He obtained all of this. He was at the center of the cloak. He was at the center of the altar. He was at the center of the entire system. He controlled and bore the weight of all of this. Therefore, he naturally became the focal point of everything. He did not look in any direction. He was like a statue of a god worshipped in a temple, watching over everyone. Cat Eyes could feel that the other 2 had already assimilated into the scene. Although they had entered later, they were more receptive to this scene than she was. Perhaps this was how the Luonan in their hearts should be? But she thought about their first meeting a few months ago. She thought about their contact in reality and compared it to the image before her eyes. She subconsciously felt an even more intense tremble. This bit of emotional reaction was soon drowned in that damned resonance. Perhaps it was precisely because of this resonance that the rhythm of the noise that made one's scalp go numb became even more distinct. In the end, it unified into some sort of hymn. Millions and millions of people chanted in unison. Cat Eyes chanted along, but the contents of her chant were far too vague. She chanted a bit in a muddled daze. She vaguely felt that the enormous cloak was a bit closer to her. It fluttered and brushed past her face. It flooded her mind, covering her in an unknown layer. All of the distractions completely receded at this moment. Only the words of praise emerged from the bottom of her heart. They curled up like smoke as they rose unhurriedly. My heart is a prison, my heart is a furnace. My heart is a mirror, my heart is a nation. Chapter 863. Snake Tongue sank into a dream that was hard to wake up from. She was originally at the side of the enormous altar in the movie theater, resonating with the countless believers and praising the inconceivable Lord. Her soul nearly melted into it. But she didn't know when it started, but she had already entered an even more absurd space. There was no process or transition, no sufficiently convincing logic. It truly was like a dream. But this dreamland was becoming more and more real. Snake Tongue seemed to have arrived at a battlefield filled with endless cannon fire. That's right, it was a battlefield. The logic of the dream was rapidly becoming complete, giving her an incomparably deep and conclusive impression. She had sunk into the center of the chaotic war zone. She was surrounded by impregnable fortresses. Rumbling war machines could be seen everywhere. Countless soldiers, wearing exoskeleton armors, operated fighter aircrafts, shuttles, and large-scale mechas. They were currently engaged in a selfless slaughter. As for their enemies, they were extraordinary life forms similar to mutants. Many of them were once elements of the movie theater in front of her. There were also some that were simply the giant bloody apes flying back and forth in the cloud world. The battle between the two sides was so intense that Snake Tongue couldn't avoid being drawn in. She couldn't even tell who was friend and who was foe. She was only driven by some unknown power. She confronted every threatening target that appeared in her surroundings and was killed. It was that simple. Snake Tongue's strength was too mediocre in this battlefield. The most frightening thing was that she couldn't keep up with the rhythm of the war. As a cursemancer, she wasn't used to this kind of chaotic, intense and tornado-like killing situation. It was as if she had sunk into an enormous meat grinder. The gaps she could survive through were narrow and cramped. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause her to be crushed into meat paste. After the pain of death passed, she would be reborn in a different location on the same battlefield and once again sink into an endless battle. At first, Snake Tongue was at a loss. What was going on? What kind of logic was this? But later on, she was killed so many times that she didn't have any room to ponder. This was because even if it was a dream, the pain she felt at the moment of death was so real that it made one shiver. Beheading, piercing the heart, chopping the waist, dismembering the corpse, incinerating it, corroding it. In the meat grinder of the battlefield, the death that Snake Tongue had once abandoned her dignity and self to avoid came in different forms. There was only the strong and the weak. There was no way to avoid it. Even though the endless rebirths had partly reduced the horror between life and death, the instincts of life still made her try her best to avoid such an ending. She fought with other people and defeated the enemy, but it would not take long before she was killed again and had to experience a new way of death. Death might be like a dream, but the pain was accumulating. Perhaps when things reached an extreme, they would turn in the opposite direction. When people were too numb, they would eventually gain calmness. She didn't know how many times she died, but in a split second, Snake Tongue suddenly had an epiphany. At that time, when she was in a state of chaos between life and death, a beam of light pierced through her and made her whole body transparent. She shivered subconsciously. Then what she sensed was not only the noisy and bloody battlefield, but also a pair of cold and penetrating eyes. The eye was embedded in a corner of this dreamscape. It could even be said that the entire dreamscape was the embodiment of the eye. That's right. The eyes were coldly watching her struggle for her life, displaying everything she had learned and revealing every trump card she had. They were also watching how much her flesh and skin could withstand, and how she would collapse and decay. Just like that, Snake Tongue was seen through from inside out. Snake Tongue was no longer confused. It was Luo Nan. She didn't know when it started, but all the inconceivable things she encountered were inextricably linked to Luo Nan. And as long as she had this central axis, all logic would be straightened out. Snake Tongue suddenly understood her current role. A test subject tied to the table. She didn't have any strength to fight back. She could only watch as the cold boy reached over and cut open her clothes, skin, and all her barriers and defenses. The cruel battlefield was the operating table. Luo Nan used this method to strip her, dismember her, and dissect her. He took apart every inch of her flesh, every organ, every bone, and every nerve. He tested the process of them twisting, deforming, and falling apart under different conditions. Then he reassembled and reassembled them. He even smeared oil and waxed them. He preserved and maintained them. He waited for them to recover to their original state before throwing them into a new round of experiments. This was how Snake Tongue felt. She struggled and fought within this absurd dreamland. But in the more realistic dimension, she just let Luo Nan do as he pleased. She didn't have the strength to fight back. Luo Nan used this method to understand the limits of her fleshly body, the limits of her mind, and some details that even she herself didn't know about. The sudden realization was unable to alleviate any of the pain. Instead, it made her feel even more despair because of the clarity. Snake Tongue didn't know how long this experience would last. She was going to collapse. She was really going to collapse. Even if it was a nightmare, even if she clearly knew it was a nightmare, thousands of reincarnations had already crushed the barrier of her will. Snake Tongue wanted to beg Luo Nan, but no matter how she struggled, whether it was bitter tears or mournful moans, it was all meaningless. Her cries and screams were unable to reach Luo Nan at all. In this moment, she understood the distance between an ant and a god more than any other time. In a certain sense, this made her feel even more despair than the endless pain. Later on, Snake Tongue even began to envy the soul fires that once sat side by side with her under the altar, buzzing in praise. She would rather become a chaotic and ignorant soul. She didn't have any extravagant desires, nor did she pursue the meaning of herself. She just attached herself to Luo Nan's system. She only wished to be able to escape this cruel torture and the despairing reincarnation. This thought was like a highly corrosive poison. It instantly spread, causing her mind, which was already riddled with holes, to practically lose all activity. If that was the case, if she could escape reincarnation like that, then Snake Tongue didn't mind sinking into that state at all, as long as it was the ultimate release. Northmont, Northmont? The sudden call as well as the intense vibrations suddenly attacked, shaking the entire dream space. It felt very violent. Snake Tongue wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, her mind was gushing with positive emotions. This was the feedback she had been begging for a long time. Finally, someone responded to her, called out to her, treated her as a normal person, a life on the same level. This scene was like someone tossing a lifeline to her when she was about to drown in deep water without a speck of light. No matter who it was, Snake Tongue would do her utmost to reach out and grab it, struggling upwards. A second later, the barrier between dreamland and reality shattered with a rumble. Snake Tongue suddenly opened her eyes. What entered her eyes was dusky darkness, followed by a chaotic burst of colorful light. Countless complex remains of the barrier were mixed within. The elements of reality and unreality were mixed together, forming an inexplicable flood of information. It crushed through the depths of her brain and heart. After no less than 5 seconds, Snake Tongue found her own logic. She was finally able to clearly distinguish the blurry silhouette of Yin Lu in front of her. In the next 3 to 5 seconds, she could feel the touch of the tatami beneath her, the structure of the wall behind her, and the sound of flowing water in the outer layer. Numerous layers of innumerable details gradually formed an incomparably solid existence in her mind and around her body. The familiar yet unfamiliar world of reality was like a sturdy escape pod. It firmly protected Snake Tongue inside, isolating her from everything in her dream. It was only at this time that Snake Tongue was able to clearly feel the situation of her body. She was completely drenched both inside and out. Sweat soaked through her clothes and the tatami beneath her was also soaked. She was already showing slight signs of dehydration. In the darkness, she didn't even know if she was bleeding or sweating. Her complexion was probably terrible. Otherwise, Yin Lu, who had a normal relationship with her, wouldn't reveal such a worried expression. "Are you all right?" "You." Snake Tongue originally wanted to say, "Don't tell me you didn't have that experience." Just as this thought arose, she suddenly stared blankly. What had she just experienced? Snake Tongue's memories abruptly turned chaotic. A certain dreamlike memory that caused her to feel fear and despair blurred at an astonishing speed. No matter how she tried to trace it back, she could only recall a rough layout at most. In her dream, there seemed to be a fortress where soldiers were stationed, a cloud that swallowed and spat out mutants, and a lava mountain range that was like a blood prison. They existed together, but they also conflicted with each other. Together they constructed a chaotic world. As for herself, she seemed to be trapped inside. She had experienced a past she couldn't bear to recall. As for the concrete details of the process, she couldn't remember them. The injury that might have existed was buried deep within that chaotic dreamland world. It also sunk into the depths of her heart. No matter how she pondered over it, it was difficult for it to stir up great waves. The only thing she could be sure of was this: what had she really experienced? Oh, there was also that Yin Lu probably didn't have such an experience. Jealousy involuntarily rose in Snake Tongue's heart. Yet she still had to thank Yin Lu for waking her up from that mysterious and terrifying nightmare. Her chaotic and complicated thoughts tangled together, causing her to be sluggish and dazed for a time. Of course, Yin Lu could see that Snake Tongue's current state was terrible. That was rather strange. Yin Lu put herself in Snake Tongue's shoes. Although the things she had experienced were shocking, they shouldn't have caused Snake Tongue to become like this. Yin Li's thoughts spun in 2 circles. She analyzed the situation from her own experience and suddenly thought of a possibility. Beishan, could it be that you were disrespectful to Mr. in that sort of situation? Disrespectful? Snake Tongue subconsciously shivered. She lost control of herself and shook her head. She wanted to speak to defend herself, but she was powerless to speak. This made Yin Lu even more certain of her judgment. Yin Lu had worked in secret orders all year round. She had seen quite a few similar things. It had only been a dozen or so days since Snake Tongue had become Luo Nan's disciple. Any business could be ruined. Most importantly, they would definitely offend the Amaterasu order. The registration had to be done. Alpine Rong III had called to give his greetings before the registration was submitted. He also wanted to see if there were any inconveniences on Yin Li's side so that they could both be aware of each other. Yin Li couldn't tell them if there were any inconveniences. She could only calmly express her understanding. She didn't forget to worry for Alpine Rong III. It's just that there are quite a few people in the processing plant. Do they all have to be registered? Alpine Rong III sighed a few times. A large portion of the workers employed in the factory come from the tribes of the wilderness. Many of them are infected by deformities. According to the requirements, they all have to be registered. Each and every one of them has a complicated background. It's very difficult to count them. Normally, this sort of thing would be done with everyone's eyes closed. Today it won't be so easy to pass. After sighing and chatting idly for a while, both sides ended the call. Yin Lu immediately turned to look at Snake Tongue. Not too good. It sounds like Old Hand and the Hengduan tribe have run into some trouble. Alpine Rong III could have warned them, hinted at them, or apologized in advance. In short, they had definitely run into some trouble that was difficult to resolve. After a few minutes of buffering, Snake Tongue's spirit was a bit better. Although it was still hard to conceal her weakness, her brain could finally spin. Next door, that operation team. They've always been very interested in Old Hand and the others. As she was analyzing, Yin Li's wristband vibrated again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. Through AI matching, it showed that it was the office number of the Ability User Association's Saka City branch. Yin Lu furrowed her brows. She connected the call again, but this time she asked despite knowing the answer. Who is this? A woman's voice rang out from the other side. There were no fluctuations in emotion. She spoke in a businesslike manner. The Blood Flame Order's Deputy First Ablatum, Madame Yin Lu? This is the External Relations Office of the Ability User Association's Saka City branch. Oh, hello. We have here the inspection report of your entry and the signed security agreement. According to the relevant clauses, we are here to notify you of a special event. Yin Li's gaze met Snake Tongue's. She continued to play dumb. What's the matter? May I ask if you already know of the notice issued by the Saka City branch? I'm not too clear. Then please take a look at the highlighted topic on the Ability User Association's internal forum. The title is, Please follow the requirements of the notice and report as soon as possible the members of your esteemed order in Saka City, their location, and other relevant matters. Everyone knew that the true God and Pope of the Amaterasu order were admittedly famous extraordinary experts under the heavens. They also had a group of top-notch talents under them such as Fatty Dragon, one of the 3 heroes of the secret order. But compared to the other 2 great orders and even the majority of the famous secret orders in the world, the Amaterasu order's organizational structure and efficiency were really mediocre. Even in Saka City, the Amaterasu order didn't penetrate too deeply into the various industries of Saka City. They only cast the ominous name of the extraordinary as a shadow in the hearts of others and spread it when necessary. Under these circumstances, the large and small orders in Saka City possessed the conditions to grow unrestrainedly. This resulted in Saka City being known as the City of 10,000 Gods. Of course, everyone now knew that this was nothing more than the leek planting techniques of the true God and Pope. After one crop was cut, another crop would grow. However, it was an indisputable fact that their organization was weak. There were some matters that one couldn't just pay attention to the deterrence of the higher-ups. No matter how useful the true God and Pope's names were, they couldn't be used as calling cards under normal circumstances, right? It was precisely under these circumstances that organizations like the Heaven Faction came into being. There were many such organizations on the periphery of the Amaterasu order. The composition of their members was complicated. Many of them were nomads from the wilderness or wanted criminals. They had a close relationship with the Amaterasu order, but on the surface, they didn't have any official relations. They were more like enthusiastic citizens, and so on. The Amaterasu order wouldn't acknowledge everything they did. Sometimes they would even beat them down. However, as long as one lived in Saka City for a long time and mingled in the inner world circles, they would understand the twists and turns involved. These XX groups, XX groups, XX groups, and so on were the hired thugs raised by the Amaterasu order. They didn't even need to give them any realistic benefits or money. As long as they lent them the tiger skin of the Amaterasu order and provided a few key people with the extraordinary power of the Fuso tree great divine treasure, as well as the true meaning of cultivation, there would naturally be countless ability users who would pounce on them like flies chasing after a smell. To be able to stand out in this group of organizations, Go to Masayoshi's Heaven faction naturally had its own extraordinary aspects. Snake Tongue had a rather good understanding of this person. Go to Masayoshi is the Saka City branch's Deputy Secretary General and a director of the Equal Trade Association. It's said that he also has a position in the LRF. Inlu said curiously, he doesn't seem like someone who's smooth and slick. Chapter 864. The veteran held a Nyogue's rib and placed it in front of him, observing the curve of the bone after deep processing. The laser ruler of the auxiliary instrument drew one node after another on the surface of the pale yellow bone, and marked the errors down to the micron. As usual, he patrolled the workshop and acted as a quality inspector, spot-checking at any time. His standards were strict, almost harsh. This one is useless. Since it was useless, the veteran was no longer careful. He held the end of the Nyogue's rib with one hand and felt that it was quite comfortable. He exerted strength in his wrist and used the rib as a pointer, whipping the workbench. Last night, because of your crude skills, I almost lost my face in front of Mr. Amo. His design, his process, all he needs is your skills. If you can't even do this well, even if you have the face to accept work, I don't have the face to send myself there. Around him, the workshop workers were relatively stable. Most of them kept their mouths shut and kept quiet. No one said anything. However, the overall environment of the workshop was still relatively noisy. At this time, at least 5 times the normal number of people were arranged in the assembly workshop. More than half of the 100-strong laborers of the Hungduan 7 divisions were stuffed here. The other half were next door. As for the remaining old, weak women and children, they had another place to settle. In short, it was separated from both sides, giving people more room for imagination, but also breeding more uneasiness. They couldn't help but worry. The current situation was almost exactly the same as the so-called return of the vagrants, and then being packed up and sent to Ban City. Their fate was still in the hands of others, and they didn't even know whether they would live or die in the future. In the past 10 years they had suffered 2 similar incidents in a row. Anyone's mentality would collapse. But the more it was like this, the more the veteran had to hold on. He was the spiritual leader of this group of people. Anyone could panic, but he couldn't. He couldn't let everyone waste their energy in the quagmire of negative emotions. Therefore he secretly clenched his teeth and put up a front. He put on a posture of not panicking in the face of danger, and everything was under control. He worked hard to let the younger generation around him come into contact with more familiar scenes and avoid the imagination combination of negative emotions. At present, the effect was limited, but he still had to bite the bullet and do it. He reprimanded his apprentices with vigor. Everyone in this workshop, go back to your workstations. Those who are not involved, move aside. Today, no matter what, 20 sets of rough materials must be delivered to me. You can't even do this kind of rough work. Why should they praise you? Perhaps it was because his words had given them some room for imagination. Someone asked, "Teacher, that Mr. Amo? Can you help us deal with this?" Old Hand's eyes widened. "What is it? What business do we have? A group of people has already come to this point, what more do you want to do?" As he spoke, he unceremoniously whipped his little disciple's shoulder with the rib whip, causing the young man's neck to twist and cry out in pain. The veteran maintained his vigorous voice and pointed at the stupid disciple who had rashly stuck out his head and scolded, "We, a bunch of people, have traveled from the Hungduan mountains to this damned place. We have been exiled for more than 3,000 miles, haven't we? Did the Star Alliance Committee give a reason? No. No reason is the biggest reason. With this reason, any crime is no longer a reason. As long as the momentum was strong enough, even if the logic was twisted, it would still have the effect of stimulating the brain." The more the veteran spoke, the more confident he became. "As long as you don't kill people, commit arson, rob, control your lower body, and don't do those outrageous things, what are you afraid of some groundless crime? Our identity is just a stick in the hands of others, helping to beat the gongs and drums to create momentum. We just need to be stained with mud and bear some crime. We don't need to worry about lice, so what the hell is there to be afraid of?" "Teacher is right, stop hitting, stop hitting." The talkative disciple's neck was about to twist, but his pleas for mercy were much louder. Old Hand knew when to stop. In fact, he knew very well that these words were extreme and biased, but it was what the group of vagrant children around him were most willing to listen to. This group of young people had already gotten used to using similar methods to hypnotize and numb themselves. They were used to lying at the bottom of the sinkhole and looking up. They had already fallen to this point, so they were not afraid of falling even more. On the contrary, as long as they climbed up a little bit, it would be a great progress. The words were old-fashioned as long as it worked. The stagnant air in the workshop finally flowed again. The people in the workshop began to move to their respective workstations, while the others stood on both sides against the walls. Seeing this situation, the veteran secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But before he could completely exhale, the side door leading to the observation passage opened, and someone staggered in. It seemed that he had been pushed, and the door behind him immediately closed. Everyone in the workshop looked in that direction. The person who was pushed in was wearing a light blue shirt and jeans, with small white shoes on her feet. She had short hair and a round face and was dressed in plain clothes. At first glance, she looked quite scholarly, but her age was a little unclear. At this time she was still quite calm. From start to finish, his face was like black iron, frighteningly gloomy, but he didn't say anything. A rat in the gutter. The veteran spat resentfully. Of course he wasn't talking about Aohira and Rong-san. He also knew that to these commoners, Goto Masayoshi wasn't a rat, but a giant crocodile. Although he was hiding in the gutter, he relied on his strong background to dig out countless benefits from the dirty water, raising his body to be fat and terrifying. At this time, the veteran actually hoped that this incident was only Aohira and Rong-san's underhanded methods. That way the situation would be simpler. But this was destined to be wishful thinking. Since Jiang Zhong walked in, the veteran knew that the situation was most likely not going to be good. Thinking of Jiang Zhong, the veteran realized that the rules in the workshop that were set up with great difficulty were messed up again. A bunch of people rushed over to Jiang Zhong and asked about the situation. Due to Jiang Zhong's subtle position in this group of people, it was very easy for some excessive words to come out, and then it would become an internal argument. Is it you guys who are up to no good? What are you guys trying to do? What are you talking about? Didn't you see Director Jiang was also locked in? Master also said that it was Aohira and Rong-san. I don't think it's that simple. It might be a plot to sow discord. You can hide a nest of cow ghosts in the hole of your brain. No matter who was arguing, Jiang Zhong didn't speak again. She only slightly lowered her head and wore a slightly nervous smile, not defending herself at all. Jiang Zhong was this kind of person. Although she was leading a research team and researching a sensitive project that exceeded scientific ethics, the way she usually behaved was just like how she was dressed right now. She couldn't get rid of the ivory tower scholarly aura. The veteran had communicated with her intermittently for a few years, so he thought that his eyes were not blurry and he understood. Those watching outside temporarily left. The veteran shook the rib whip again and came back to rescue Jiang Zhong. Is this how you work during working hours? The scene was a little chaotic after all. Someone even talked back, today is Sunday. Then a series of complaints exploded. Even if there are 3 shifts, I still have a day off today. I didn't brush my teeth or wash my face and I was carried here. Today is Mother's Day. I don't know where my mother is. Fortunately, the prestige of the veteran was considerable. The people were just saying it to vent the shock brought about by the series of unforeseen events. After the old man waved his whip a few times, the crowd slowly dispersed. Those who should go back to their workstations went back to their workstations, and those who should squat in the corner squatted in the corner. Thank you, Master Shou. Jiang Zhong thanked the veteran for helping her out. The latter wanted to sigh but forcibly held it back. With a cold old face, he signaled Jiang Zhong to go to the supervision post with him. In the end, the hearts of the people were still wavering. Be it the people on the production line or the miscellaneous people in the corner, their gazes drifted along with them. The veteran suddenly turned his head back, and his fierce gaze finally forced everyone's thoughts back. When they finally reached a relatively quiet place, the veteran could finally sigh and let out the breath he had been holding in his chest. Master Shou. Jiang Zhong wanted to say something, but the veteran stretched out his hand and stopped him. All right, don't mention anything. I just wanted to come here to catch my breath. The veteran might have put on airs in front of a group of juniors, and he also forced himself to hold his breath. It was not easy for him to have a chance to take a breather. After another minute or two of silence, the veteran opened his mouth again and said in a hoarse voice, "They shouldn't have come for us, but we just had to be caught in the crossfire." Jiang Zhong lowered his head and said nothing. Regardless of whether it was the veteran or Jiang Zhong, both of them had some private matters that could not be exposed to the public. If it was possible, they did not want to be exposed under the spotlight. However, regardless of whether it was the small migrating tribe led by the veteran, or Jiang Zhong, the technical director, they did not have the ability to struggle out of the whirlpool. They had no choice. What could they do? The veteran could not help but ponder, we are fish in the crossfire. Where is the city gate? Before he could figure out a reason, the small door leading to the observation passage opened again. This time it was not the weak technical director who came in, but the ruthless, violent people of society. Shou Xiong, you hidden cultist, come and confront us. And this, Jiang Zhong, his name is strange. He is most likely an accomplice. Take him away too. Before the veteran and Jiang Zhong could react, 7 or 8 people had already rushed forward and surrounded them. They put on nylon ropes and dragged them away. The assembly workshop was in an uproar. At this moment, no one cared about discipline or workstations anymore. Dozens of young and strong laborers rushed forward, and it looked like a fight was about to break out. Not good. At this moment, the veteran's body was being pushed, but the sharp alarm in his head was not at all. This kind of scene was clearly aimed at intensifying the situation. At this moment, although the veteran's body was covered in the middle by the burly, violent people of society, his figure could not be seen, but a hoarse voice rose up, rough, 20 sets of rough. No matter what, make them today. If you can't make them, then you are not worthy of being the men of Hengduan Mountain. Such a scene, such words were extremely absurd, but it was this absurdity that made the hot-blooded young and strong men stunned. At this moment, the veteran struggled with all his might, but it was not to break free from the restraint. Instead, he exploded with brute force and forcefully brought 2 or 3 men beside him out of the door and into the observation passage. Right here, on the side of the thick wall that could not be seen from the workshop, dozens of armed people with electric batons and anti-riot guns were already ready to go. At the end of the observation passage, Okairu Rongzhou and Goto Masayoshi both stood there. Okairu Rongzhou, you despicable person, you dare to use a gun. The veteran's eyes were about to pop, and his throat was already hoarse from shouting, not only to the manipulator behind the scenes, but also to the hot-blooded young people in the workshop. The uproar in the workshop somewhat stagnated. At the other end of the passage, Okairu Rongzhou was expressionless, but in his heart, he clearly knew who the veteran's burst of hatred was directed at. What a ruthless and experienced person. Goto Masayoshi praised at the side, then turned into the disinfection passage leading to the exit. Okairu Rongzhou looked at the veteran, again from afar, and followed behind. After a few steps, he finally could not help but say, Mr. Goto, you can withdraw your people. That's fine, maybe there are still people who can't think things through? It looked like Goto Masayoshi had made up his mind to explode a bomb for fun. Okairu Rongzhou even wanted to bring out the boldness of the Vanguard captain back then, and smash a fist into the back of this guy's head, but in the end he still clenched his teeth and endured and followed up. Mr. Goto Shiro is a vagrant, even if his faith is chaotic and out of line, it is still pardonable. As for Director Jiang, she is a high-level talent we hired, and usually only buries herself in research. Goto Masayoshi suddenly stopped, turned around and wiped away the light and shadows of the passage on his face. Mr. Okairu, as far as I know, President Matsudaira has always been famous for being good at management. There is no one in Osaka who doesn't admire his way of management. But here, the daily management is really worrying, especially the human resources. Don't forget, I am the Vice President of the Labor Union, and a Director of the Labor Safety Inspectors Association. I have the responsibility and also the obligation to inquire about this matter with your side, and report the results of the inquiry to the relevant parties. So, I hope you can give me a satisfactory answer and not this kind of meaningless argument. Okairu Rongzhou took a deep breath. Mr. Goto, I am introducing the situation to you. Goto Masayoshi raised his hand to cut him off. I said, a hasty answer is not sincere. If you always have this kind of attitude, I can only interpret it as, you are trying to shirk responsibility. Even if Okairu Rongzhou was a clay figurine, right now he was also provoked, his majestic body leaned forward. Mr. Goto, what on earth did you see? Can you interpret it as you first chose the frame and then let me fill in something inside? Please pay attention. Compared to Okairu Rongzhou, who was twice as big as him, Goto Masayoshi's expression didn't change. He only raised his hand again, and this time he extended his index and middle finger, turned his wrist and pointed at his eyes. Mr. Okairu, you cannot trust me, but you have to trust my eyes. Goto Masayoshi's eyes were probably the most prominent part of his thin face. They were a bit bigger than normal people, especially on his face that was so thin it was out of shape, bulging and protruding. Even if he kept his eyelids half closed, the details of the movements of his eyeballs and his eye sockets could be clearly seen. Right now, the dim yellow pupils under his half-covered eyelids were turning, at first glance dim, but in the deepest depths, there was a dark red light. It was like the sunset at dusk, separating the horizon from the night sky. At some point, Okairu Rongzo actually felt a bit dizzy. He subconsciously averted his gaze, unwilling to meet it. Goto Masayoshi's voice pierced his ears. Remember, it won't make a mistake, the only one who will be wrong is you. As she spoke, she moved her hand, and the private projection area was placed in the main projection area of the room, side by side with the surveillance footage of the North Mountain Lake. Look, although the two sides are still minding their own business at the moment at a deeper level, there are already undercurrents flowing, and we're just waiting to break that information barrier. Aren't you curious about what will happen then? Tamagawa Aishuk was very annoyed by Xinyan's beating around the bush. What's the point of finding a witness to identify him? Whether the identity of Mr. Mo is real or not, whether his relationship with the Blood Flame Order is shallow or deep, who cares? Even if the connection at T-City is successful, and the identification is successful, do you really expect him to just stand there and let us capture him? Instead of playing this kind of detective game, why don't you let your team of subordinates directly take action, and Goto Masayoshi will be able to see more things. Captain Jimmy needs a key to open his own weapon box, and always stand on the side of morality. This is a rare quality for frontline personnel. Bai Xinyan seemed to be completely unaware of the twists and turns of the plot. She displayed the bearing of a superior but quickly changed the topic. Mr. Yuchuan, is it really okay for you to make your contempt for the Blood Flame Order so obvious? Tamagawa Aishuk sneered. Stray dogs, rootless duckweed, even if I want to pay attention to them, it depends on whether they can handle it. Bai Xinyan was not in the position to defend the Blood Flame Order, she only shrugged. We still have to respect the judgment of the frontline personnel. Even if there really is a problem, this is not an intercontinental airship, and the distance is so close. Are you afraid that we won't be able to react in time? Tamagawa Aishuk's slightly flushed face was now whitened, and his straight back collapsed. The scene fell into a deadlock, awkwardness, and some kind of doubt that was not fully displayed. Under such an atmosphere, there was finally a change at the passenger terminal. Goto Masayoshi broke away from the strange state of looking at the monocle and chatting around the condensation ring, and entered the main topic. Mr. Mo of the Blood Flame Order? You can call me that. What's your full name? Position in the Blood Flame Order? Goto Masayoshi gradually increased the pressure, also closely watching the reaction of Mr. Mo. Relying on the special structure of his eyes, he was equivalent to a human-shaped lie detector, able to monitor the breathing, pulse, skin moisture, and so on of the target in detail, but Mr. Mo's cooperation was obviously not enough. This is an interrogation? If you can't find a more suitable term, you can temporarily say it like this. I think it still has the corresponding qualifications. As he spoke, Goto Masayoshi reached into his pocket and took out a vintage leather wallet, from which he took out a beautifully designed business card. There are a lot of titles on it, but there is a higher probability of finding a position corresponding to the interrogation from it. Sakura Officials, Ability User Association, or something else. These are all fields that I am good at. Mr. Mo didn't intend to take it. He just narrowed his eyes and slightly raised his head to look at the still dazzling edge of light in the gaps of the thick fish-scale clouds. Mr. Mo? I think no matter how dazzling your titles are, they can't compare to today's sun. I don't like this weather and I don't like you either. Only this pair of eyes is a little more interesting. Goto Masayoshi was stunned for half a second, then laughed out loud. No matter how he laughed, the surrounding atmosphere quickly turned cold and stiff. At this time, Captain Jimmy, who was already half hidden behind him, coughed lightly, giving a signal of, everything is ready. Some things are not up to people. Goto Masayoshi's interesting dim yellow eyes locked onto Mr. Mo's face, and between the gaps of his lips and teeth, He chewed out syllables that sounded like ice. As he spoke, he shook his wrist, his fingertips drawing across the faces of Jiang Zhong Okuni Rong, and finally falling on the side of the veteran. This person, he's under my protection. If there's anything, you can't go wrong by looking for me. Goto Masayoshi choked, and the wrinkled skin at the corner of his mouth trembled. He wanted to laugh but felt that it was exceptionally strange. He subconsciously glanced back at the veteran, only to see that the latter also had a confused expression, as if he had even forgotten to be touched. A frank answer. Although it was somewhat unexpected, Goto Masayoshi still quickly calmed himself down. His dim yellow eyeballs slightly shifted in his eye sockets, focusing on Mr. Mo's face again. Then you're admitting your connection with the Soul Cult? Mr. Mo sighed. So you admit that the Blood Flame Order and the Soul Order are colluding? Damn you. This is the most despicable slander. A shout suddenly sounded on the dock. A thick Western accent, as well as the environmental sound that seemed to be slamming the table, seemed out of place in the lakeside dock. On the dock, most of the people were shocked by this voice. Shifting their gazes towards the direction of the voice, what they saw was a rippling halo. This was the projection area. In order to have a good effect on a sunny day, they had even done some processing so that the colors of the people and the background inside were more or less distorted, but the clarity was still above the standard. Everyone could tell that what was shown in the projection area was a conference room. There were about 10 people inside, divided into 2 groups, sitting face to face across the long table. There were all kinds of hair colors, eye colors, skin colors, and all kinds of skin. Their body language was uniformly relaxed. There was only one person who had just stood up from the main seat of the conference table. His expression was sullen, and he even waved his arm to the point that the corner of his suit was lifted. It felt like he was walking with the wind as he walked towards the direction of the camera. Hasty judgment, ridiculous accusation. You guys made a long-distance connection just to let me see this? The angry man's camera sense was very good. The position where he stopped it was just right, giving the audience here a sense of oppression, but also not causing his face and figure to change. Speaking of which, he had a great figure. Wearing a casual suit, matching with his deep and upright face as well as his slightly slovenly brown beard, he had the air of a celebrity, a person who could easily leave a deep impression on others. Being scolded by such a person, Goto Masayoshi's tolerance seemed to have increased. His expression didn't change at all, his gaze still fixed on Mr. Mo's face, not even blinking. On the other hand, Mr. Mo was a little curious about the newly appeared projection character. Shifting his gaze, he turned around in the projection area, and also made eye contact with the angry man opposite him. The angry man made an immediate reaction. His body slightly leaned forward, further increasing the pressure. The reputation of the Blood Flame Order cannot be controlled by some shameful smelly bug. Who are you? Mr. Mo asked curiously. What? The other side was obviously stunned for a moment. The instantaneous reaction caused many cracks to appear on his angry expression, which was then drowned by a smile caused by absurdity. You don't know me? Mr. Mo leaned back on his wheelchair, slightly tilting his head and curling his lips. His posture was actually a little childlike naivety. Even if he didn't say anything, he didn't hide his true thoughts at all. Should I know you? The angry man completely broke down. He laughed out loud, half turning around, his right hand hitting his chest, displaying an inconceivable emotion to the others in the conference room. See, he said he doesn't know me. At least half of the people in the conference room laughed out loud, while the other half didn't know whether to laugh or cry as if they were watching a ridiculous play. Gathering the cognitive resonance of the entire conference room, the angry man turned around again, his deep eye sockets and grayish-green pupils filled with a joyful emotion. I don't know how to address you. But there's one thing, since you don't know me, then in the Blood Flame Order. Cadman, don't be rude. A sharp voice cut across, forcefully interrupting the speech over there. At this moment, Goto Masayoshi should have been the one to speak up and cooperate, but for some reason he was staring at Mr. Mo in a daze. Captain Jimmy, who was at the back, saw that his reminder was futile, so he rolled his eyes and went up himself. Cadman, as a high-ranking member of the Blood Flame Order, doesn't know Mr. Mo, who claims to be a member of the Blood Flame Order, and the Order's deputy high priestess holds a completely contradictory position. What does this mean? Yin Lu was expressionless, but the flames in her eyes seemed to want to penetrate the projection and burn D City, which was half the Pacific Ocean away. As a deputy high priestess, Go-To Masayoshi's hoarse voice cut in at a timely moment. Deputy High Priestess Een, at a time like this, the hierarchy within the Blood Flame Order is at most a part of the evidence. It's definitely not suitable as a tool to refute the evidence. Speaking of which, Mr. Cadman has already voluntarily signed the relevant witness agreement, and the legal department, along with the D-City Ability User Association, the Veterans Association, the Mercenary Service Club, and other experienced third parties, have done the notarization. In terms of the priority of legally admissible evidence, Mr. Cadman has already surpassed you. It complements his status as a high-ranking member of the Blood Flame Order. This was a premeditated encirclement. Inlu felt even worse. If it was possible, she would have pressed Cadman into the lava lake at the bottom of the Blood Soul Temple, rolled him over 100 times, cooked him, and exploded him to vent her anger. But now, the space of thousands of miles had erased all possible weapons, leaving only the least lethal words. High-ranking? Mr. Mo's low voice sounded like he was talking to himself, but it also carried a tone of doubt. Captain Jimmy defended his statement first. There are only 9 members of the Order's Council in the entire Blood Flame Order. Of course, they're the high-ranking members. Cadman cooperatively bowed and revealed a reserved smile. At the dock, Mr. Mo shook his head slightly. My energy is limited, so I'm not too clear about the Blood Flame Order's current governance structure. I only know that the Order has 127 fanatics and 1540 devout believers, and 127,000 shallow believers. You're not one of them. Without waiting for the others to respond, he tilted his head back slightly as if he was talking to Een Lu, but also as if he was sighing with emotion. As an order, the number of devout believers and fanatics is, to be honest, a little low. It's not enough to support the Blood Soul Temple's full operation. Is it because of the Ideology Church? Een Lu, Cadman stared blankly for a second before revealing a brilliant smile like that of a star. Mr. Mo, are you going to deny Madame Halder and Madame Een Lee's authority over the selection and appointment of the Order's believers? You should know that I greatly respect the Order's trust in me, and I have a good collection of the appointment letters and authorization certificates they've issued. There's also more concrete evidence. Cadman stretched out his hand. Beneath his bronze-colored skin, there was a layer of dark blood-colored light flowing. The air around his arm seemed to have been scorched by a high temperature, forming obvious distortions. However, the shirt and suit sleeves above his wrist showed no signs of being charred or burning. Violent Flame Seal. This was one of the Blood Flame Order's high-end physical techniques. For someone like Cadman to be able to execute it without needing to adjust his chi gathering, it was already a high level of proficiency. His combat power was definitely at B rank. Most importantly, using a physical technique to form a supernatural power close to flames would definitely require a powerful interference power. As a fleshly ability user, Cadman could only rely on the Blood Soul Temple to achieve this effect. I can call upon the power of blood and fire at any time. I've always believed this to be the acknowledgement of the Blood Flame will. But now, Mr. Mo, are you going to deny all of this? Cadman found the feeling of anger in the time it took to say a few words. He used a brilliant expression to smoothly transform it. Vice Abladamine, could it be that you aren't going to give your devout believers a doctrinal explanation? Een Lu didn't respond. Mr. Mo scratched his chin. In this sort of situation, even if we eliminate the factors of philosophy and methods, the Blood Soul Temple system does indeed have some unreasonable areas. Cadman nearly couldn't keep a straight face. The way you speak doesn't sound like someone from our primordial sect. It sounds a bit like the Restraining Faction? The so-called Restraining Faction was the branch of the Blood Flame Order that Tian Bang, who was known as the #1 person below the Transcendent, belonged to. It was this military powerhouse and his influence that had chased Madame Halder's group from Xia City to T-City. Cadman's words were filled with malice and sarcasm. Unfortunately, Mr. Mo was completely indifferent to this. The doctrines of the Blood Flame Order are actually quite mediocre. It's better to refer to the real thing and study it seriously. It's not too convenient for me to go over right now. How about you come over? Someone in the conference room of T-City let out a muffled laugh. The situation was slipping to an even more absurd level. Cadman spread his hands. He was already at a loss for words when it came to this Mr. Mo, who was sometimes mysterious and sometimes crazy. That's a really good suggestion. I think I have enough time to consider it. His arms spread out and swung along with the movement of his limbs, bringing with it a scorching hot wind. The power of the explosive flame seal still affected the surrounding area. Cadman subconsciously swung his hands again. The dark bloody light was disturbed by the airflow. It was like a flame had been blown up from a half-extinguished pile of embers. The light suddenly brightened. There really was a flame. A bloody flame burned. Cadman's expression changed. It just happened that its huge head passed over the fence, and visually, it was already about the same size as Mr. Mo, who was in a wheelchair. Separated by Mr. Mo, Goto Masayoshi carefully observed the vicious creature. In the depths of the dim yellow eyeball, the layers of light became more and more complex. The level of power that was being used also became more and more profound. This caused a huge pressure on his body, causing the blood vessels and tendons around his eye sockets to bulge, especially the temples on both sides. It was almost like a dense net. So ugly. Jiang Zhong, who was very close, seemed to be affected by the sound wave attack. He actually didn't feel any fear, and only muttered his evaluation. The target was a little vague, but they were all suitable, causing the veteran and Ao Ping Rong to look at him. But at this moment, the most eye-catching was still the ugly monkey, and the most important person beside him. From start to finish, Mr. Mo, who was in a wheelchair, did not move at all. Actually, most of the people on the pier were the same. It was just that the others did not have time to move. As for him, Mr. Mo's gaze was focused on the projected area. He looked quite serious, to the point that he didn't seem to care much about Captain Jimmy's death trap. The people who had just caught their breaths unconsciously followed his gaze, and once again turned their attention to the conference room thousands of miles away. In front of the camera, Cadman at some point was already stuck there, his knees bent and his spine curled, his left and right arms half raised, bent into a stiff angle, as if he had raised his hands to surrender, but his crazed raised head made it look more like a prayer of failure. Burp. A strange sound similar to a burp came from the ugly monkey's enormous cranial cavity. The pipe that made the sound was the area on his face equivalent to the mouth and nose. There were no obvious organs there, only dark purple and wrinkled flesh. It felt like a piece of rotten meat. There were a few intermittent openings in the middle. They were all opening up, squeezing out saliva pus. It was more like the sticky lava flowing out of the cracks of a volcano, black and red interweaved, burning the air, about to fall but not yet. On the other side, Goto Masayoshi, who had been observing all this time, suddenly had a twitch in his temple. He noticed. On that lava saliva, the scattered fire pattern cracks faintly pieced together to form a face. And it was getting clearer and clearer, more and more definite. In the projected area, the image of Cadman, who had already turned into a burning statue, became more and more similar, reflecting each other. Chapter 868. It was indeed Cadman. While the two groups of people were separated by thousands of kilometers, most of them could only rely on the visual similarity, as well as the logical reasoning of the situation. Goto Masayoshi had already used his special ability to find conclusive evidence. Although from the perspective of mutual interference, the outline of the human figure in the lava saliva had already been changed beyond recognition by the violent aura of the ugly monkey. But as long as one could grasp the most essential core inside, and then follow the cause and effect to push back, one could basically complete the restoration. That guy Cadman had a physical body, so he was originally unable to achieve the effect of Ean's spirit leaving body. But Mr. Mo had also considered this point and used the lava saliva to create a temporary container, which could also be called a cage, to absorb his soul body over, and also achieved a rather complete reflection. If Cadman didn't mind, it wouldn't be a problem to use that saliva as a body. Goto Masayoshi saw through some things, but the price he had to pay was severe physical discomfort. His eye sockets were burning hot, the dim yellow eyeball was slightly pulsating, bringing up the eyelids and the surrounding blood network, forcing them to increase the speed of blood supply in order to offset the loss of special vision. Goto Masayoshi was really having a hard time. The miraculous actions of the eyeball had already exceeded the upper limit of his consciousness control. What was worth rejoicing was that this effort had obtained corresponding results. And he had also discovered even more. In Goto Masayoshi's eyes, the current projection area was like a demonic mirror. It only reflected the most important part, and then made absurd distortions to all other elements. On both sides of this mirror, no matter whether it was the two parties in the T-City conference room who were closely related to Cadman, or the heavenly people, who were purely there to support, in a sense, had already unified and mutated into a kind of low-level existence. The number of these people, and the difference in their appearance, seemed to no longer have any practical meaning. If one had to forcefully come up with a meaning, it would probably be equivalent to raw materials. People could not believe in the correlation between both sides of the mirror, but this mirror was simultaneously reflecting the panic and fear in their hearts, and it was vividly displayed. These negative emotions that had been detonated and multiplied continuously were being transformed into a special form of existence on the mental level, or perhaps in the deeper realm, and were communicating with Mr. Emo limited by his own level and comprehension. Goto Masayoshi was unable to understand too much. He could only make a superficial description. It was roughly like the pervasive dirty smoke, moving through the gaps between the slight lifting of the heavy cloak. Of course, the smoke leaked out, but the process only happened in an invisible place, in the black box deep within the cloak that was difficult to observe. Over there seemed to be a demon enjoying this special ingredient. It was eating clouds and spitting out smoke in a leisurely manner. And when Goto Masayoshi wanted to pry a step further, what should be sealed was still sealed, what should be chaotic was still chaotic. It shouldn't be. Separated by thousands of miles, the consumption of the tyrannical and terrifying soul absorption wasn't enough to affect the cloak's concealment effect? Or could it be that Mr. Mo's level of control over the Blood Flame Order's fundamental power, as well as the corresponding techniques, allowed him to ignore the obstruction of spacetime and casually manipulate a high-ranking member of the Order like Cadman? If that was the case, Mr. Mo's control over the Blood Flame Order was simply unimaginable. With the existence of such a controller, Madame Halder, as the officiator, was truly purely used for sacrificial purposes. Oh, it couldn't be that the sacrificial object would be Goto Masayoshi, who had forcefully peaked at this level, was reduced to the level of most people, who could only use their poor imagination to make conjectures. At this time he especially hoped that Captain Jimmy's hand could be a bit more forceful than before, or at the very least, create a bigger gap in the cloak. But the current Captain Jimmy seemed to have been frightened by his thwarted operation. Even though his entire body was covered in armor and his face couldn't be seen, his body showed an obvious sense of stiffness, as if his soul had left his body. Jimmy-kun? Still no results? Somewhat unexpectedly, when Goto Masayoshi called out to Captain Jimmy, the latter also contacted him through the preset communication channel. Did you see anything? That monster. What? I'm talking about that ugly monkey, that largest ape-like creature. So what? Captain Jimmy's mood clearly fluctuated. Damn it, have you been scared silly? It's right there and you're telling me, so what? Don't tell me you're only looking at its drool? Goto Masayoshi stared blankly. That's right, such a large mutant was right in front of him. Why didn't he pay attention to it, and instead was only interested in the drool that this guy dripped? Even though that was also a very important part, the ape-like creature right in front of him was clearly an extremely powerful mutant. For Mr. Emo to be able to summon it out of nothing, the interference, the consumption, was probably even greater than the long-distance soul-sucking activity under the rules of the Order. He actually didn't think of something that was clearly in front of him. Goto Masayoshi faintly felt that it was a bit strange, and felt that Captain Jimmy's mood was too abnormal. He subconsciously asked, "What did you see?" This thing. You don't know? Damn it, don't tell me you don't have the slightest idea." Should I know? Goto Masayoshi was truly a bit confused. He indeed didn't have any related concepts. At this moment, it was as if there was a piece of information that everyone knew, but it was perfectly missed by him. As a social creature, this kind of feeling was terrible. But this also stimulated his curiosity to an even greater degree. The focus of Goto Masayoshi's gaze naturally spread away from that lump of lava saliva that was about to fall, and expanded to the related area around it, that enormous and ugly face that seemed to have half-rotted. The focus of his gaze constantly adjusted, sweeping past the fine scales on the ugly monkey's face, the half-caved-in forehead and crown, the wrinkled flesh, and finally made contact with its protruding crimson eyes. Large and empty. This was Goto Masayoshi's first feeling. But for some reason he didn't dare to explore further into the depths of the hollow. In reality, at this moment, the frequency and amplitude of his eyelids twitching had increased dramatically. His eyelids that were especially loose due to his emaciation couldn't help but droop, but were stimulated by his eyeballs and bounced back again. The current Goto Masayoshi seemed to be looking directly at a dazzling light source, looking directly at the sun that was about to rise above and below the horizon. Completely out of instinct, Goto Masayoshi wanted to turn his face away to avoid a direct attack. He indeed completed this action, but what was truly moving was only his neck and head. In his eye sockets, the pair of dim yellow eyeballs didn't move. On the contrary, they even pushed open the eyelids that they were trying to cover, and controlled all the related nerves, blood vessels and muscles, staring fixedly at that ape-like creature's ugly face, especially the large and empty bloody eyes, motionlessly. The dazzling feeling continued to spread over. If it was a normal person, they might have already started crying non-stop. But Goto Masayoshi didn't, because even if the tears were about to flow out, they would still be used by the dim yellow eyeballs as lubricant, better than nothing. Goto Masayoshi's heartbeat suddenly sped up. Part of it was due to the fluctuation of emotions caused by losing control, but the other part, which was also an even more important factor, was that the eyeballs needed more blood supply, more nutrition. Goto Masayoshi's body was heating up, but the pores on his skin were abnormally contracting. It was precisely under such a contradictory reaction that even more energy from his limbs and bones were mobilized, rushing upwards in the most efficient manner for the eyeballs to use. Other than that, there was also the endless sunlight from the outside world. At this moment, Mr. Mo's voice sounded again as if he was talking to Yin Lu. Did you see it clearly? Ah, what? Yin Li's reaction was similar to Goto Masayoshi and Captain Jimmy. Half a second later, she came back to her senses and asked, what exactly is this thing? A type of wondrous creation that I discovered in the past. I call it the rotten mouth ape. I only discovered it recently, although it looks a bit ugly. Its entire body can be converted into energy. And it's relatively easy to mold, and its stability isn't bad. It's a natural building material. Yin Lu. It was also at this moment that the air seemed to ring out with a slight air explosion, similar to the noise of bubbles bursting and air burning. It was very easy for normal people to ignore this kind of sound, but a few ability users with keen senses could determine that this sound originated from the ugly monkey. Oh, it should be the saliva from the rotten mouth ape's mouth, which meant that it came from Cadman's side. A judgment was a judgment, but not many people could clearly determine what Cadman was doing. Until Mr. Mo spoke again. I'm not angry. Why should I be angry? There are people in the order who are 10 times, 100 times more excessive than you, and their statuses are even higher than yours. Yin Lu had been a bit absent-minded ever since the rotten mouth ape appeared. She heard Luonan speak of a sensitive topic at this time, and she subconsciously wanted to interrupt. Don't listen to his sophistry. It's nothing. Mr. Mo slightly tilted his head. His thin and ordinary face formed a marvelous contrast with the rotten mouth ape's enormous face, which was only separated by a fence. Since the blood flame will was proposed when the order was founded, it is tantamount to giving up a portion of power and the corresponding design. The only reason why a situation like yours has occurred is because the Blood Soul Temple, the foundation of the order, lacks a stable and effective identification and withdrawal mechanism. One is the problem of design ideology, and the other is the problem of design ability. Of course, the lack of reflection and supplementation on the material plane is indeed a troublesome matter. Then there's the problem of the level of the current group of people in the order. Take Cadman for example. He's a blood-sucking bug, yes, but if there's no improvement in the application of ideas, then the vast majority of people in the order are essentially no different from him. Mr. Mo slightly raised his chin when he spoke to this point. He squinted his eyes and looked behind the cloud of fish scales that filled the sky. He looked at the edge of platinum light that cut down. On this point, some people don't hesitate to use materials, but they do it quite brilliantly. Chapter 869. There were always coincidences in this world. At that moment, Mr. Mo looked up and met the observer, in the private airship. Even though he knew it was because of the angle of the broadcast, Yukawa Aishuk, who was sitting on the sofa, held his breath. His eyelids twitched just like a certain guy by the lake. A thought popped up in his mind. He was talking about the true God and the Pope. Yukawa Aishuk quickly ignored this feeling and thought. He forcefully shifted his gaze to the ugly face of the ugly monkey. Oh, the ugly face of the rotten mouth ape. Stimulated by the forceful twist, some pieces of information flew out and were about to form a string. There was only one line left. A few seconds later, Yukawa Aishuk suddenly raised his voice. Takemoto, Takemoto. Takemoto Shigeru quickly appeared in the room. Yukawa Aishuk ordered his intelligence chief, the investigation report from the Aptitude User Union, the one about Gong Chi, pull it out immediately. Shigeru Takimoto, who was proficient in this business, did not say a word. He completed all of this within 2 seconds and projected the contents of the report onto the projection area. Yukawa Aishuk's eyes widened as he searched for the information he needed, but he was soon disappointed. The report was vague and only reported the death of Gong Chi. At the same time, they hoped that branches, powerful organizations, and the church could help investigate the solidification of the abyssal region around May 1st, Chan City time. No, not this. Yukawa Aishuk realized his memory was messed up. He clearly remembered something about it. It's in the internal report of the Jade Society, but it's vague. There's only a simple description of ape-like creatures. Yukawa Aishuk was surprised that it was Bai Xinyan who reminded him. When he checked the relevant content, it was indeed as Bai Xinyan had said. It was only better than nothing. No more detailed information? Transcendents are very proud. They won't describe the death of their own kind so clearly. I suggest you get a good night's sleep. Staying up late will really damage your IQ. As she spoke, Bai Xinyan left the armrest of the sofa. She strode out of the room. Ever since the intercontinental airship incident, Yukawa Aishuk had always been suspicious of Bai Xinyan. But when she really left, he was not used to it. Where are you going? Meeting? Don't disturb me during this time or I'll be very grateful. Yukawa Aishuk was sure that there was a gap in understanding between him and Bai Xinyan, and this gap seemed to reflect the difference in their information levels. In the era of information and authority, there was nothing more depressing than this kind of gap. What was even more tragic was that people like Bai Xinyan seemed to be many, many more than he had imagined. Along with the shrill siren, the high-altitude region where the clouds were surging was filled with a blinding red light. The image of the environment that was extremely close to reality began to solidify and then fade away. When the visual virtual scene disappeared, the cramped space of the health pod was completely revealed. The warning light on the top of the pod was still flashing rapidly. Tian Bang shook his head. Through the slightly turbid nutrient fluid, he could see the high-priority notifications on the interface of the cabin wall. They glowed red and vibrated continuously, attracting his attention. Due to the limitations of his physical body, Tian Bang decided to use telepathic communication. Dr. Pan, the group's experimental base has been overrun by the mutants? Dr. Pan, who was usually calm and collected, suddenly spoke in a hurried tone, which was rare for him. Big news, big trouble, big opportunity. Anyway, hurry up. I'll give you 20 seconds. Please, I'm in the health pod right now. Oh, that's true. Speaking of which, the health pod simulator is more useful than the helmet. Fine, just stay there. I'll open the communication channel to you. You have 10 seconds now, including the time to look at the data. The communication was then cut off. Immediately after, a portion of the health pod broke away from Tian Bang's control and entered remote conference mode. It guided Tian Bang's senses and projected him into a huge conference hall. The standard of the conference was definitely very high. It was similar to the ring-shaped conference hall where the Star Alliance held a global board meeting. Yes, wait a minute. That's right. Although Tian Bang had never spoken here, he had been one of the people in charge of the security forces and had strolled around inside before. He had already seen the Star Alliance's logo that could be seen everywhere in the conference hall. It looked like a printed simplified map of Earth. Some said that it symbolized the coexistence of the common world and the inner world since the era of distortion. Some said that it was a hint of the existence of the deep blue world when the Star Alliance was first established. Perhaps it really was a big scene. However, the conference had probably been held in a hurry. The conference hall, which could accommodate thousands of people, was mostly empty. The figures were all concentrated near the ring-shaped conference table in the center, and some of the empty seats still had figures appearing intermittently. Tian Bang felt that he should thank Dr. Pan, who had given him the right to choose his image during the virtual projection. Therefore, what appeared in this conference hall of the highest standard was only a humanoid shadow. Otherwise, he would probably be known throughout the world as the Blood Prison Exhibitionist. Good thing I didn't miss it. Dr. Pan appeared beside him. He was still wearing the white lab coat, but it suited his image very well. Tian Bang chuckled. Thank you very much. Dr. Pan waved his hand. Don't worry about those useless things. Watch carefully and digest it well. Although we're just here to listen, we might have a speaking mission. Oh. To be honest, I'm a little nervous. I've never seen so many extraordinaries in my life. They're all top-notch material. Tianbang, half a second later, his gaze suddenly cut to the ring-shaped conference table in front of him. The ring-shaped area in the middle was already playing an image, in the form of a 30-fold fast-forward. This kind of highly compressed video data would cause a normal person to faint. However, a burner like Tianbang could use the Dynamo Core's analysis function to directly reorganize the information. As for those who chose this kind of unconventional method to receive information, Tianbang's gaze swept past the faces and backs of those people in order to compare them with the built-in database. That yellow-bearded old man is the president of the headquarters, Abner. On the left is Marin, who was beaten up badly by him last time. On the right is the #1 ward master, Dale. And there's the Monroe Cannon. Sitting behind Abner is Li Baijiu. Looking at where she's sitting, she's attending the conference as a reporter. Next to her is Ghost Eye. That old pervert still wants to take advantage of her in the virtual world. Her Majesty Empress Wu is also here. Is it really good to favor one and discriminate against the other? Next to Empress Wu is Ouyang Qin. He's always serious. Speaking of which, the seating arrangement at the society's side is a little messy. The seat diagonally across from us is empty, but there's a balanced scale. Clearly, the Archbishop of the Order of Justice is also coming. The bald Pope of the Order of Amaterasu has already arrived. Only the most mysterious High Lord of Secret Contract is left. Oh, I can only see the back of his head from where I am. That's right. This was a conference of extraordinaries. It was a dialogue between high-level life forms that had climbed to the top of the world. However, the beginning was nothing out of the ordinary. President Abner coughed and spoke in a gentle and feminine tone. There are still a few who haven't arrived yet, but since we've caught up with the live broadcast, we won't wait any longer. Let's watch while we discuss and exchange our opinions. As he spoke, the video playing at high speed slowed down and entered normal mode. The most eye-catching thing in the video was undoubtedly the huge and ugly face of the demon. Half of its body had caved in, and the other half had rotted away. There was also the lava mouth that was dripping down, as if it could fall to the ground at any time. All these factors fiercely occupied the attention of the audience. However, what attracted Tianbang's attention the most, which was also the focus of the video, was the man sitting in a wheelchair beside him. He looked unfamiliar and a little too thin, as if he was ill. However, at this moment he was quite relaxed. Perhaps it was because of the sudden change in speed, but the body language of the man in the wheelchair seemed to be slow and unruffled. He was giving a demonstration to the woman behind him who was gently holding the wheelchair. Look, with this half-energy, half-material thing as a foil, Cadman's body and soul structure is a lot more straightforward. Limited by the conditions, we can only look at the general outline. You should be able to find the resonance structure related to the Blood-Soul Temple. Understand the relationship, and then refer to the actual emotional state of a life form, and you'll roughly know where the problem lies. The man in the wheelchair explained while his hands did not stop moving. His fingertips made a few horizontal and vertical cuts in the air, cutting the dripping lava mouth into 20 to 30 parts of different sizes. Not counting the scraps on the periphery, the main part of the cut was clearly a scaled-down human body, including the head, shoulders, chest, abdomen, spine, limbs, and the isolated internal organs. There were also fiery threads in between. They were like the connecting lines of a doll, but they were also like the blood vessels and nerves of a real human body. It was precisely this dismembered lava mold. The head, at the top, had already been cut off. It was the size of a date, but it had complete facial features. At this moment, it was completely distorted by fear and pain. Unfortunately, not many people could clearly hear what it was shouting. Inside the virtual venue, most people had dull expressions, but there were also some who were overflowing with interest. This person is certainly an outstanding surgeon. He's also very good at teaching and educating people. Sitting on the right side of President Abner was the world's top boundary grandmaster, Constance Dale. She was still dressed as a medieval witch. Her hood covered her face and the corners of her lips were half hidden. She carried out her favorite mysticism. Because of this person, I think of another person. He also loves to preach. The legendary Professor Luo. Didn't he come to the conference today? Oh, you're talking about Luonan? President Abner stroked the yellow beard on his cheek. His tone was still gentle. This time, it's an analysis and discussion on the death of Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi. It's an invitation system. Luonan is an irrelevant person. But according to the theory and level of strength he's displayed recently, he's certainly qualified. As he spoke, Abner cast his gaze towards Ouyang Qin, who was a bit far away. Although it was a virtual world, his gaze was still solid. Oh Yang. Why don't your branch contact him? If it's convenient, invite him over. Everyone can exchange what they need. Chapter 870. Ouyang Qin did not sit at the very front of the ring-shaped conference table. Instead, he sat in the second row with Her Majesty Empress Wu. He sat upright, watching the live broadcast very seriously. His right hand tapped soundlessly on the virtual desktop. The changes in length were quite rhythmic, giving people the feeling that he was taking notes or something. His appearance was in stark contrast to Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was sitting leisurely next to him. Her Majesty Empress Wu was fiddling with the virtual scroll in her hand. Ouyang Qin did not respond immediately when President Abner called out to him. 2 seconds passed before his fingertips stopped tapping. He turned his face away from the central projection. It was unknown whether or not it was a virtual effect, but the frameless lenses clipped to the bridge of his nose seemed to be plated with a layer of light. The lenses covered most of his pupils, and his expression was stern and serious. He still did not open his mouth. It seemed that he was choosing his words carefully. Then, earlier you wanted to join in on the fun and get a share of his grandfather's property. Now you're asking for an exchange. Are you preparing to take the opportunity to call each other brothers and get greedy? A moment of silence appeared in the ring-shaped conference room. Then there were coughs, muffled laughter, and of course loud laughter. At the level of participants, the vast majority of people already had the tendency to do as they pleased. Not everyone would take President Abner's face into consideration. Of course, everyone's gazes were cast in Ouyang Qin's direction. However, everyone could see very clearly that Ouyang Qin did not open his mouth. The voice came from beside him, behind Her Majesty Empress Wu. The audience was already there. Wow! Tianbang let out a small gasp of surprise. He could clearly see that the person who had spoken against Abner just now was clearly a young girl. She wore a brimmed hat and a black jacket. She looked like she could just go out and do a street dance and play around. She really was a young girl. Tianbang recognized her. She was Zhang Yingying of the Xia City branch. She was a diehard follower of Her Majesty Empress Wu. She was also someone in Luonan's circle of friends. Speaking of which, this young girl didn't even seem to be an architect. Why did she come to listen? It was fine for her to come with Her Majesty Empress Wu for a meeting, but her words were really out of line. Tianbang grinned. Don't be fooled by Abner's soft voice. He wasn't able to become the president of the Ability User Society by relying on his ability to eavesdrop. Zhang Yingying also seemed to know that she was in trouble. She pulled down the brim of her hat, shrank her neck, and tried to hide her body behind Her Majesty Empress Wu. No matter what, she would not make eye contact with President Abner. The smile on President Abner's face didn't change at all. He didn't berate the youngster for being rude. He even stopped the furious Marlin and looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu. The expression on the latter's face was indifferent. He didn't react much to the gazes from President Abner and the other directions. Using the virtual book in her hand, she gently combed the hair by her cheek and said softly, "Don't doubt it. It's my idea. Martial monarch, I've just become a transcendent, so I have to make things difficult for him." Those words were reasonable, but they were slightly vulgar. I was afraid that it would damage my bearing, so I let my children speak. Please don't blame me. The atmosphere in the conference room was obviously breaking down. Not just the others, even Ghost Eye, who was standing behind President Abner and chatting with Li Baijiu, was laughing very loudly. In the end, Abner had a deep understanding of the Great Wall Mansion. Even at this time, he was still managing his expression perfectly. The smile lines on his face even deepened a bit, so much so that the yellow beard on the side of his cheeks shook slightly. I understand now. It's because I'm standing up for Toyama's high seas auction. Commercial activities are special in nature. Moreover, times have changed. Everyone holds this meeting for the sake of negotiation and exchange. It's just that some youngsters in the past lacked experience and lacked communication channels. They didn't really know how to negotiate on stage. They felt wronged when they were bullied in a fight, so it was understandable that the adults would stand up for them. And now that the youngsters are independent, everyone is happy to see this happen. What's the standard for children to fight? Ouyang Chen's index finger scraped across the bridge of his nose. He slightly adjusted the position of his glasses and spoke very seriously. I've made a post-mortem deduction of the intercontinental airship incident. When Luonan began communicating with the youngsters of the Yuchuan family, the interference power of the abyssal region was far below the observable standard. The level and intensity were considered very low. No matter what, it wasn't out of line. Why did an adult suddenly jump out? You're talking about us, right? The Pope of Baiji let out a low laugh. His thin, hairless face had a calm appearance. It doesn't matter if it's me or Qianju. We won't overstep our boundaries and stand up for the children of other families. As for the intercontinental airship incident, it should be understood like this. Pulling people to the table, whether it's drinking tea or arm wrestling, always requires a bit of effort. Fine, this is your president's logic. The truth is that we've always bullied the weak and feared the strong. It's just that ordinary people aren't as strong as us. The corner of Tianbang's lips twitched. Especially the latter. It has been confirmed that on May 1st, Chan City time, the Blood Flame Order had an unplanned sacrificial event that also lasted for a long time. This bit of evidence is quite solid. Let me add, the most important witness is that person. Oh, Cadman. The unlucky guy whose life and death could no longer be confirmed. Thank you, Apocalypse Laboratory, for providing us with an observation point of view, allowing us to simultaneously witness the birth of this Mr. M.O. At the same time, we also added 2 more conditions. There is one that we can't see, but the evidence is conclusive. This Mr. M.O. is quite accomplished in the field of exoskeleton design, and he is very willing to invest. He is currently discussing the purchase of a processing plant in Ban City. As for what we can see, it's a mutant called the mushed-mouth ape. There are no records of it in the world's searched information. The only thing that can be seen is that plane, shrouded in clouds and mist. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.